Are children capable of making this kind of life-altering decision?
My answer to that question would be unequivocally no.
You need a doctor's opinion, parent surveys, significant amounts of therapy, and then once every box is checked, to make something that drastic.
I brought together two thoughtful advocates with very opposing views on the topic of gender transition for kids, one of the most contentious topics of our time.
Conducting genital surgeries on minors based on, quote, thought leaders in the field? This is horrifying.
The real cruelty here is how minors are being butchered by doctors who put profit over protecting our kids.
The rise in anti-LGBTQ plus legislation.
If you are forcing a trans child to go through puberty when they are trans, that is tantamount to torture.
This really is life-saving care.
Allie Beth Stuckey is the host of the conservative Christian podcast Relatable, who's passionate about helping women build their worldview upon the Bible.
I am an author, a podcast host, a commentator, a wife, and a mom. I don't care what the Washington Post or the New York Times or any left-wing activist has to say about how that's healthy conversation to have with a kid. No, that is a form of grooming.
There's so many people who are intimidated into silence.
This idea that I am the center of my universe, that the individual is the only thing that matters, that we're not created for a greater purpose, that there is no absolute truth. But as it turns out, human beings are wired to look for truth. I think it is objectively, morally, ethically wrong to mutilate your body, in particular as a child. And it's going to sound really scandalous, but I do not believe in transgenderism.
Desmond Fambrini is a public and private school teacher who is a learning specialist with a Master of Science from Johns Hopkins University, who began his journey in education after graduating from Dartmouth College, where he double majored in government and gender studies.
Desmond Fambrini, he, him, gender fluid, bisexual.
I was assigned male at birth. I am non-binary, specifically gender fluid, but I am biologically male.
Given the right environment and the right kind of focus on academic achievement, it's really insane what can be accomplished. The first day, I had 25 students. By day 2, I had 19, because 6 parents switched out of the class because they saw me, and they were like, there's no freaking way, before I even got a word in.
Desmond, what do you want to say?
I know it's hard to remember, but we actually are on the same side.
I am a chatty person. Let's see if anyone else has something to say.
I don't think my existence is confusing or scary. I don't think trans existence is confusing or scary. I don't think we need to get rid of gay teachers. We don't need to get rid of trans teachers. We don't need to get rid of all trans books.
Has transitioning become a social media trend?
Yes, it has become popular. Having some kind of obscure or different identity can be a social contagion.
It's not something that you do for fun.
We discuss if sex is assigned at birth.
I so see that perspective, and I've never understood that before. Thank you for explaining that to me.
Yeah.
I don't agree with you, but I get it.
Does a medical consensus always equate to what's right and true? What about detransitioners who regret their transition and live with lifelong consequences?
This was the moment that we all became victims of so-called gender-affirming care. My childhood was ruined, along with thousands of detransitioners that I know through our networks.
This is the face of an almost 30-year-old man. When is the trans community going to take accountability for leading me down this path?
And I really thought about my future in ways that I was just not capable of at the time. I kind of had an oh shoot moment that I could have really damaged that chance.
When I talk about being too far gone, this is what I mean. And it just keeps getting worse. I don't really see being able to come back from what's happened so far.
How can we support people with gender dysphoria?
There is at least a 40% decrease in suicide rates for those given gender-affirming care.
There's no way for us to know statistically if what you're saying is true.
What an incredible and, dare I say, beautiful conversation between two respectful and kind individuals. All that and more on the Ellen Fisher podcast. Thank you guys both so much for being here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while.
Yes.
And before we start, Desmond, do you want to share a little bit about why you're wearing sunglasses?
Because
I know
fish today.
People are going to ask.
It's actually very on subject because we're talking about gender affirming care. And as a 30-year-old biological male, my hairline starts to go back a little bit, and you can get a procedure done that's a feminizing hair transplant where you get it more circled out, which leads to a good amount of face swelling, which I'm not embarrassed about, but just to, keep the glasses on. But if you have any questions about that, let me know, because I feel that we don't see the process. We just see sometimes the finished results of these situations, or we see the perfect, they went into surgery and everything worked out great, but there's the bruising and all of these things. And I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm also saying know all the information. So I was very happy to kind of show that perspective, but with glasses on as well.
Do you have anything you want to ask him about that?
Not necessarily, not yet, but maybe we'll get into it a little bit more once we start talking about procedures and things like that.
Definitely.
But for now, I'm good.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. So my first question I'm going to pose, I'll start with you to answer, and then you can reply.
Sure.
Allie, is should children under the age of 18 be legally allowed to transition with medical interventions such as puberty blockers, hormone therapy, or even surgery like removing healthy breasts of girls? And are children capable of making this kind of life-altering decision?
Wow. So first of all, that's a spectacular question. And I think that there's so many nuances within the question that it's a question that I can't say yes or no to, because in my opinion, it is actually circumstantial, right? So maybe if I was able to break down the question into maybe a more specified kind of topic. So like, for example, let's talk about puberty blockers, right? Could that be something that is used in kind of the medical field to give gender affirming care to? Well, we have the studies, right? We say that, we see kind of, a fairly 90% kind of effective in not necessarily curing the depression, but an improved sense of self when a child with kind of gender dysphoria is given gender affirming care. That seems to be fairly good. We have people like the American, Psychiatric Association, Trevor Project that are all saying it tends to work fairly well. We've used puberty blockers for precocious puberty for decades before. We don't know all of the long-term effects yet. That's fair. But this is one of those times where I tend to go with the specialists, the endocrinologists, the child psychologists, and it seems like that would be a fair kind of intervention method. But I'm of course willing to hear other perspectives.
I would say, unfortunately, a lot of those institutions and the people in those institutions are captured by a particular ideology that really sacrifices the well-being of kids. So my answer to that question would be unequivocally no. Before the age of 18, your frontal lobe isn't developed. Your frontal lobe isn't developed until you're 25 years old. And that is very important for understanding the long-term consequences of your actions. So if you're thinking about puberty blockers, 10, 11, 12 years old, you certainly do not have the ability yet to understand the long-term consequences of what you're putting your body through. Not only your body, but also your mind actually requires puberty to be healthy. So to grow up, for maturation, not just physically, but also mentally, you need puberty. To be fertile later on in life, you need puberty. And so boys in particular who go through puberty blockers and they stop that natural process of puberty, they are especially risking their future fertility. And of course, typically this leads to cross-sex hormones, which is chemical castration. And so you're talking about, in many cases, irreversible procedures and processes that kids cannot consent to because they do not have the mental ability to understand the long-term repercussions.
I love everything you just said. And I really, first of all, I appreciate when you talk that I could tell that you care for what the welfare of the children are, right? So I, first of all, appreciate that perspective. I do, in my personal opinion, get worried because I have my master's of science in education from Johns Hopkins with a focus in neurodiversity, right? And I see a lot of statistics like this get thrown around and they're very out of context, right? That idea of like, well, the frontal lobe is not developed until you're 25. Due to neuroplasticity, your frontal lobe is not fully developed ever. Right? And if we said, you can't make decisions until you're 25 because your frontal lobe is not developed, we wouldn't hold people accountable since the age of 18 for doing random crimes. We still put people in juvenile detention facilities. We don't say, your frontal lobe isn't developed, so you can't make that decision yet, right? We hold people can drive at 16, right? We don't say, your frontal lobe is not developed, you're not able to actually operate a car. No, we let people get into a car at 15 and a half, right? And that puts people like a ton at risk, right? So I just see a lot of these statistics being like, the frontal lobe is not developed until 25. One, not true. Two, that's not necessarily scientifically relevant when it comes to neuroplasticity or neuroscience. Furthermore, that idea of like, chemical castration, completely different, right? Also, I again appreciate that you're kind of going towards that idea of like, it's about fertility and it's about making not everyone's focus is fertility. And like, you were saying, as somebody who's conservative, Catholic, I so appreciate that.
Not Catholic. I just want to clarify that. That's
I'm
okay.
so sorry. I sincerely apologize.
No, that's okay.
So my family, I was going to say, is Catholic, right? Desmond Fambrini of the Cross. So I completely understand that focus in fertility. And again, I apologize, but maybe that's not everyone's focus. Like maybe some people's focus, I would love to hear your thoughts though.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving that perspective. And I love to know your background and how much you know about neuroplasticity and things like that. And so obviously it's true that we allow young people to make some decisions. Now, I would be for conversations about kids getting their driver's licenses later, or raising the age of when kids enlist in the military, 18 years old. But that to me doesn't justify allowing them to make these kinds of decisions that will have long-term repercussions. It's not the same thing as allowing a young person to drive a car. Of course, there are decisions that we allow young people to make. It's not like we treat them like children. As you said, we do hold them liable for some crimes that they commit. But when we are talking about altering and stopping a natural and necessary process for the human body, like puberty, when we are talking about injecting a young person's body with hormones that are not naturally created by their body, we are talking about, again, long-term, lifelong repercussions. Yes, possibly fertility, but also the for example, like the decay of the uterus when you have too much testosterone in your body as a woman, all different kinds of physical maladies that come with trying to change your body into what it can never be. I just don't think that young people who so often have other mental health diagnoses really have the ability to make those decisions. I've talked to, and maybe you have too, so many detransitioners who at the time that they transitioned or tried to transition when they were a teenager or maybe even 19 years old, they got the double mastectomy, they went on the testosterone, they thought for sure at that point that they will never, ever, ever want kids. No, I don't want to be a mom. Right. I'm a man. And then not only did they detransition and realize, oh, I want to be a mom, they realize, oh, I really want to breastfeed. Now I can't do that. And unfortunately, the adults in their life had the same mentality that kind of you just expressed, that, well, if you can drive a car, you can decide to cut your healthy breasts off. And now they're living forever with that guilt. I think we can do better as adults to help guide kids in a better direction.
Can I actually respond to that? Because I love that idea. So how would you consider kids cannot make that decision on their own, but with people they can? Because that's what I think. I don't think a kid should be able to wake up and call me controversial. And actually, multiple people in my community don't like me for this, right? But if somebody at 16 is depressed, diagnosed with depressive, and they go, I want to transition, and I don't want the double mastectomy, I don't think they should be able to get that immediately. I think there should be, just like the American Psychological Association says, significant screening. You need a doctor's opinion, parent surveys, significant amounts of therapy, hormone blockers to extend the amount of time that could actually be, where this can be considered. And then once every box is checked, to make something that drastic. Because you're talking about a drastic decisions that, in all fairness, and I hope this doesn't come off as tongue in cheek, you talk about are lifelong effects. Statistically, most of the lifelong effects tend to be positive statistically, right? Like you say, like, oh, well, I've talked to so many detransitioners, literally, knee surgery. We have higher rate of regret for knee surgery than we do, gender affirming care, right? Hair gender affirming care actually has without exaggeration, 100% approval rate in the trans community, right? We can look that up on something like Alexa even. But with that said, right, how do you feel about people coming together to make these decisions, just like we do when a child needs some other type of support, whether it be a physical disability, learning disability? We come together as a community, medical community, educational community, vital, parent, come together and we make that decision like as a team. How would we, does it have to be an unequivocal no? Can it be no in some and yes in others?
Unequivocally, no. Unequivocally, no. Okay. Because there are, of course, things that even if you had the consent of a child and you had everyone saying, yes, absolutely, let's cut this child's legs off because they identify as someone without legs, we could still say from an outside perspective, you know what? No, that's going to be wrong. That's going to be harmful for that person. It doesn't matter if everyone and their mom says that it's okay. Everyone with a white coat is saying, yes, that's great. Someone from an outside perspective, even without without those credentials can say it's not right to cut someone's healthy legs off because we don't like the consequences and the repercussions of that. And so that's what I would say there. And I also just wanted to clarify something. You talk about the rates of regret. One, I don't actually think that we have very good data on that. We don't have very good statistics or reliable information on just how much regret is out there. Plus, it's really hard to be a detransitioner that speaks out because you get a whole lot of hate from the community that you were once a part of. And so I don't think that we have good, reliable information on that. But I am not basing my disapproval of and disagreement with transition on the rates of regret or not. I think it is objectively, morally, ethically wrong to mutilate your body, in particular as a child, whether or not they want it, think it's great, think it's awesome for the rest of their life. I am never going to be for the blocking of the puberty of or the chemical castration of a young person.
I feel like I'm entering my fine jewelry era, you guys, because Katori Life has completely drawn me in with the most beautiful pieces made with 100% ethical and recycled gold, silver, and bronze. I am in love with their Orion's Belt gold ring with champagne diamonds and their heritage signet ring, which is a beautiful ode to the artistry of time. There's never been a better way to support ethically sourced fine jewelry than from Katori Life, whose ethos is slow fashion and provides generous, fair wages to all their employees. Get an exclusive 20% off Katori Life with any purchase entering my code Ellen Fisher. Every piece sold plants 10 trees, so you not only get an incredible deal, but feel really good about planting a tiny forest too. I get compliments on my Katori Life jewelry everywhere I go, and everything from their shop is truly comfortable, high quality, and so beautiful that I reach to wear these pieces every single day. Get your new jewels at KatoriLife.com. That's CATORILIFE.com. This deal is only available for a limited time with my code Ellen Fisher.
And then I think like the last question is, I guess, first of all, you're an amazing speaker and I love listening to you. And I think that you put your points
You're very
really
articulate,
right? So I, first of all, really appreciate how you're also listening to what I'm saying and like addressing, because I feel like a lot of people don't actually listen to the other perspective. I think what you said was really important, right? And that idea of, oh, you said it in such a beautiful way, like morally, ethically, logically wrong or something like that. But I guess I get confused because yes, you're right. There is data and the data may not be perfect, but I guess I get confused on where your paradigm comes from, right? Like you clearly are looking at the situation from a certain perspective. And I look at the situation and I go, well, one, I've had this experience, right, as a genderqueer individual, but two, I've done the research, right? And I'm sure you have as well. So this is where I got my perspective. The data says that we got the 90% kind of increase after they give gender affirming care, decrease in suicide rate by 40%, less suicides, overall, overall, it seems like a positive thing that's occurred. We got, endocrinologists saying this, psychologists saying this, the teachers are saying this. And then also on top of this, we have basically every world country that has said yes to gender affirming care and allow transitions and allow transgender individuals. We have not only higher rates of happiness in these countries, but higher GDPs, because it also causes like a prevention from psychological intervention that's needed later. It actually increases overall like GDP per capita per individual, right? So I'm just looking at it from economic perspective, psychological perspective, endocrinologist perspective, teacher perspective. And I hear your moral perspective, but I don't see why.
Yeah, let me respond to that, because I am so impressed by your recall and your ability to articulate your argument. So thank you so much. So I do want to address a couple things that you said. One, this idea that people who transition have lower rates of suicide than people who are maybe not able to transition, or someone doesn't use their quote unquote correct pronouns. Again, why we don't have, well, I added that. You didn't say that, but I added that because that is something that we hear a lot, that social affirmation is important to help prevent suicide. And so you didn't say that, but that is kind of a stat that's thrown around a lot. And the reason why we don't actually know that, Trevor Project loves to say that, is because when someone commits suicide, we don't know why. And so in order to say that authoritatively, while this lowers the rate of suicide, we would need to know why exactly those who say didn't transition or weren't socially affirmed, why they did commit suicide. It's kind of a correlation causation fallacy. We're assuming that they committed suicide because, they weren't affirmed or they weren't allowed to transition. We don't actually know that unless they left a note, which most people don't, unfortunately, who die by suicide. And so very often, people who say that they're confused about their gender or that they identify as the opposite sex, they very often have other mental health issues. They very often have other trauma, and that is simply true. And so there's no way for us to know statistically if what you're saying is true, that it prevents suicides or lowers the rate of suicide. We just don't know. And then I also just want to address that economic point when you're talking about places like Sweden, for example, that are very affirming. Actually, the biggest study on suicide of people who identify as transgender comes out of Sweden. And what they found was that the suicide rate did not decrease after men specifically tried to transition into women. And that's probably the most affirming country that we have. And the best data that we have from that country actually says, yeah, and I can provide the links and people can check it out. I know it's hard to like talk about studies in the moment because it's like, where's your source? And we can't do that extemporaneously, but I would, be happy to look at your studies and you can look at mine and all that stuff. And so, that's what I would say. That's what I would say about that is that in places that are very liberal and affirming, we actually don't see a difference in suicide rates. And it's also a correlation causation fallacy because of course we don't know what's really causing the suicide.
This is a great topic and we can stay on this all day, but it's just that idea of, I think I get a little bit confused though, because your first argument, that idea of, well, it provides a decrease in suicide, but we can't really tell what the decrease is. And I heard that point that you made.
I don't know if it decreases suicide.
Okay, so hear me out. And this is just me asking, right? That idea of like, well, you can't tell if it decreases suicide. We have multiple studies. And then I actually want to hear your opinion on something that almost is arguing against me, but I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
That idea of, we have multiple studies that say that there is at least a 40% decrease in suicide rates for those given gender affirming care, 40% decrease in suicide. You said, well, you don't know why they're not committing suicide. It doesn't technically matter. If something is statistically relevant, it's a 5%, right? So 5%, it's static relevance. If you do any type of kind of statistical analysis, right? If you have a static relevance, if you are over 5% in most case studies. So it doesn't matter the reason they didn't commit suicide. If you have a group population, transgender individuals, this amount of them gets gender affirming care, this amount commits less suicide. Doesn't matter the reason. It's relevantly, it's connected. It's 5%. But I think my question, and this one is going to be interesting, right? And here's where we get into the dark waters, where it's no longer like her versus me, is like 40% still kind of low. You know what I mean? Like, that's not good. That's not good. Yeah. Like that. So what do we do about that? Because that freaks me out. Like, and I think this is the gray area that we don't explore, and we never get past this point, because that's what freaks me the heck out. Like, if the statistics in the studies said, hey, we have transgender individuals, and this is 2020 study, right? They go, 72% of transgender youth, right, experience happier lifestyles after gender affirming care, but 72% still experience depression. I'm like, what the hell? Sorry. What type of study is that? And that was, I think, done by the Trevor Project, right? And I'm like, first of all, in 2018, we had a 90%. 2018, 2019, I will check the study. 2018, 2019, we gave a kid gender affirming care. They essentially had the same mental health as everyone else in the general population, aside from higher tics of anxiety. 2020 and 2021, we do the same study. 72% are still depressed.
That's
what just happened. Like, I actually, that's why I wanted to talk to you guys. Cause I'm like, something's wrong. My statistics that I'm naming aren't adding up. So I want to know, how do we fix this, in your opinion, though?
Yeah, I don't know if I can give a solution for how to fix it. What I found, and this is true when it comes to studies that seem to support my opinion, right, or if someone is coming from a liberal perspective, a study that seems to support their opinion, so often the headlines and the conclusion and the summary, as you probably know very well, of a particular study, it doesn't actually bear out when you look at the conclusions. This was true during COVID with masks and things like that. Like, the news, they would run with headlines, and then you would look at the summary of the study, and it would say like masks cut deaths in half at, elementary schools. And you'd be like, whoa, that's crazy. And then you would go into the methodology, and then you would break down the data, and you'd be like, wait, that's not actually what it shows. And in the study that you're referencing, if I remember correctly, if we're referencing the same study, they weren't actually able to see any kind of mental health or suicidal ideation difference in the two groups of people who transitioned and didn't transition. And again, we'll have to both look at that to make sure that we're we're looking at the same thing. I think the point is, though, that you're making is that there's competing data. And so what is the truth of it? And that does get complicated if you're looking at it from a perspective of, well, what just makes people happy?
Right.
What makes people feel good? And while of course that matters to me, it does. I don't want anyone committing suicide, no matter what they believe, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I agree with their choices or not. I don't want that. But I'm not only looking at it from that perspective. I'm looking at it from the perspective of biologically, there is male, there is female. It is actually impossible to change your sex. We probably agree on that. It sounds, because you said biological
you can't
male.
biologically,
So, yes,
you can certainly identify and can be respected, right? In my opinion.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that later, but you can't, we don't have that technology
and
yet,
that's what perspective that I'm coming from. With those two biological realities, I think that they are important. I think they're amazing. I think men and women and boys and girls are supposed to complement one another, that being a boy, being a girl should be celebrated, that these are necessary distinctions for actually the existence of all human life. And taking someone down the journey of trying to identify as or be something that they biologically aren't is not just damaging for them, is damaging to the concept of truth as a whole, and is damaging to society when we'll get to that, when it looks at, women's sports and women's spaces and women's privacy, this blurring of the lines, this self-declaration, self-identification that I can be whatever I say that I am and my biology means nothing. I think it is absolutely destructive for society. So whether or not someone is happy about their transition is almost irrelevant to me.
Wow.
Okay, so I have
interesting
a really
points.
good question to go on after this one. Is sex assigned at birth, or is it established at conception and recognized before?
Oh,
you want to go?
Oh no!
I can go first, or you can go.
Oh no, you should go first.
Okay, you go, Allie. Okay.
Oh god.
Sex is not assigned at birth. Sex has to do with your gametes and has to do with your chromosomes. Those things are really kind of intertwined. And of course, a woman or a female has large gametes. She produces ovaries, and a man produces sperm, testes. We've got X, we've got XY. All of these things are actually determined at the point of fertilization, at the point of conception, which is so incredible. And of course, there are abnormalities and there are different anomalies that people experience. But just because there are anomalies or disorders doesn't actually negate the sex binary. That is true at the cellular level. So a man has all XY chromosomes in every cell of his body except for like some of the sperm, which of course determines the sex when you're procreating. And then a woman has all female cells in her body. So down to the cellular level, from the point of conception, we are either male or female. Wow, that is so fundamental. And again, that we would try to mess with that cosmetically or hormonally, it's just always going to spell disaster. It's so obvious that science tells us so much of how things are supposed to be.
She is scientifically correct. I do have to say. So I think, and again, right, I try to come things as objective as possible, right? Sex is not determined at birth, nor is it assigned, right? You are fertilized. You basically have that XX or XY. About 2% of the population, we have the intersex. So I do think biologically a third gender kind of exists, but I mean, we don't say like red hair is a mutation, right? Red hair is another color, right? So intersex, I would say, is a third biological sex, 2% of the population. We don't call redheads mutants and weirdos, right? No, they're a hair color. So is intersex. So
I disagree with that, but I'll respond in a little bit.
That's totally fair. Almost irrelevant, right? That idea, in my opinion. But that idea of, yes, you're scientifically, in my opinion, you are correct. With that said, I think that there is a kind of kindness and fairness that comes with saying what you were assigned at birth. Because when you are born, you are all of a sudden given expectations when you are declared a boy, or you're declared a girl, or you're declared intersex, right? And that's what really matters. And I think if we as a society were kinder and more open to people being able to be themselves, then we could just say, oh, you're this, you're that, you're the other, right? But I think that idea of saying, oh, like I say, I was assigned male at birth, right? Because when I was born, that's when the expectations started. And I'm not saying that biologically on, first contact sperm and egg meet that I wasn't biologically coded as XY chromosomes, because I was, you're right? But there was also a societal expectation placed on me when I was given the bubblegum blue cigar as a kid. And that's why I think that, yes, scientifically you're accurate. And I think that anyone who has any science background can't argue with you when it comes to that. I don't necessarily know if we need to be so forceful though. And we can just compromise and say, yes, biologically, everyone kind of is coded for a certain gender. Let's say assigned at birth, because that's societally what's relevant. And that's where I come from. But I would love to hear your opinion, and also about the intersex thing too.
Sure. I guess I can say the intersex thing first. So the intersex is just, like you said, it's an aside. It's kind of a tangent from our main point. But I will say, like, intersex, I kind of think it's a misnomer, because many times people who have so-called intersex conditions like Turner syndrome or something, they are still male or female. They just have some kind of hormonal abnormality, or sometimes it's a chromosomal abnormality. I would not call it a third gender, because there are so many different diagnoses within this umbrella of intersex. Again, there are some intersex conditions that only affect females. There are some intersex conditions that only affect males. And so I would think it was wrong to say that it is some kind of third gender. And I also think, I'm not saying you're doing this, but sometimes they're used as kind of like a scapegoat and a front for transgender ideology, when really a man identifying as a woman has nothing to do with someone who has an intersex condition, someone who was born with a chromosomal abnormality. Most people who are identifying as the opposite sex, so-called transgender, don't have a chromosomal abnormality, so they don't need to be a part of the conversation. That's my take on that. As far as assigned at birth, I think language is really important. And because you acknowledged that scientifically it is correct that from the moment of conception, you are, unless you have one of those abnormalities, XX or XY.
Well, not at the moment of conception. It takes a little bit longer, but the idea is like, yeah, but you rolled it. I'm sorry to interrupt.
From the beginning.
But like from the fairly beginning, because technically it's not quite demonstrated until a couple of weeks in, but yes.
Okay. So maybe in that time, that is some time that little fertilized egg can identify as something else. But after that, they're either XX or XY. And so this idea that you are assigned something, it sounds very arbitrary. So you're saying that this doctor has the authority to basically look at someone's genitalia and say, I don't know, I'm just going to assign you boy, assign you girl, as if we haven't known for all of human history that we were sexually dimorphic and that there is male, there is female. You can observe that from the outside. And so we're not assigned this. That's just not the correct word. I know you care about the preciseness of language. You're saying,
because so this is how we're interpreting it differently. Because I think to myself, well, saying I was assigned male at birth gives people leeway, and it takes into consideration the social implications. And I think that it's more respectful to kind of say, oh yeah, well, this is what you were considered. But you almost see that as almost making it frivolous. Like your gender was this arbitrary, random thing that someone just declared one day. I so see that perspective, and I've never understood that before. Thank you for explaining that to me. Yeah. I don't agree with you, but I get it.
I just think it's like inaccurate language. And I think someone's sex is so fundamental to who they are. And I also think it's important to separate like stereotypes from sex. Like you were saying, okay, you were called boy at birth. That's kind of what you said. And that you were then, all these expectations were placed on you. And while I do think some societal expectations are directly correlated to someone's sex and they're fine, not all of them are. And so I think that we can say, okay, not all stereotypes about men, women, boys, girls are helpful, but that doesn't mean that sex is arbitrary and we need to use language like assigned.
Well, I think you have a good point. And I think, again, I really appreciate your perspective. I do have to say, and I'll also like look at your content, because every once in a while I do get a little bit confused on, I guess maybe your terminology, like that idea of like, well, only some intersex conditions only affect men. I'm like, well, they're intersex, right? Or you know what I mean? Like that. That's
why it's a misnomer. That's
like,
why
I don't really understand your point.
I don't like the word intersex.
So what would you consider? So, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. No,
okay. Okay. So that idea of like, so what would you consider then if someone is an XXY, right? Like, what do you consider male and female? Is it the genitalia? Is it the chromosomes? Is it the estrogen and testosterone levels? Like, what is male and female to you?
No, I think it's probably a combination of a lot of those things. It really comes down to gametes. That's what most biologists would probably say. It comes down to gametes, and it comes down to chromosomes. And yes, of course, there are people that have anomalies. Like I said, they have the chromosomal abnormalities. I don't think, like you said, there's some mutant or there's some freak. As a Christian, I would say they're made in the image of God, and they have just as much value as anyone else. But in the same way that there are people that are born with one leg, I'm not going to stop saying humans have two legs. Right. I'm not going to stop saying that humans are bipeds. We understand that humans are bipeds, and the existence of someone who is born with one leg doesn't negate that fact. And that person isn't any less valuable, but they're born with one leg. But we say people have two legs, and we're fine with that as a rule.
Oh, wait, we say people always have two legs?
We would say, if someone asked you, hey, do human beings have one or two legs? You would say, oh, humans have two legs. You would say they're bipeds, right? Like, that's a rule. Like, we have two legs. We're meant to have two legs. We're supposed to have two legs, right?
Okay. So like if someone said to you, for example, like, how many legs can a human being be born with? Would you say only two?
I would say they're supposed to have two.
Supposed to have two. Okay.
Yeah.
So like,
in the same way that you're supposed to have XX or XY, but things happen. I would use the language like we live in a fallen world. And so there is sickness, there is brokenness. Things aren't always how they're supposed to be, but that doesn't negate the rule.
I see your point. So do you think, this is why I always get in trouble, because I know I'm like supposed to be like debating against it, because just for the record, I do significantly disagree with that perspective, but I'm more interested in how you're thinking about it. Do you feel like that somewhat erases an identity of 2% of the population? Like, what about those? It just, to me, I am not intersex, right? I think you had a really solid point there. That idea of like, I am non-binary, if that helps you understand who I am. And if not, then I'm a guy that likes to wear makeup, whatever the heck works for you, honey. But that idea of, I have nothing to do with intersex, and I shouldn't take the intersex population and use them to justify why I put on makeup every day. That's such a valid point. But to the intersex population, I don't know. I mean, if you were intersex and you just heard how I described it, being like, oh yeah, they're a significant population and they're valid, and how you described it being like, well, there is something wrong with them, it's like having one leg, would you feel validated or justified as you as a human being, or would you feel a little bit sad? And I mean, if you were intersex, how would you like to be described, by you or me, in this situation?
Well, I think you've placed them under one umbrella to say that all intersex people are a third gender, when really it is an umbrella for all different kinds of anomalies and disorders. Many times that requires surgery, requires medication in a very different way. I have to take medication for my thyroid. I can say that the thyroid is supposed to function one way. It's supposed to produce the right levels of T3, T4. It's supposed to have those levels. Mine doesn't. And so I have to take medication to fix that. But it's okay for a doctor to say to me, you know what, this is how the thyroid is supposed to function. Yours doesn't function that way. I was born that way, whatever it was, it doesn't function that way. And so you need something to help. Those people are not less valid as human beings, but I think that they were probably diagnosed at some point with the kind of anomaly. So it's not me saying, wow, you're so different. Probably a doctor told them, yeah, you see how everyone has XXXY? Here's what's going on with your chromosomes. We'll figure it out. It's okay. You're a human being made in the image of God. You're awesome. But again, using them, which I'm not saying you're doing, but using them to try to say, there's not two genders. There's so many genders, or there's three genders. That is just using them as kind of like a front or a mascot. And they were born a particular way. People who wear makeup or identify as the opposite sex, we're not. It's totally different.
Totally different.
In my perspective.
Totally different. So, okay, question. Can I ask you a question? And then I want to involve you too.
No, I know, we're
like,
just like
you. Oh my gosh, right?
Literally, I feel like you need no moderating.
Like,
you guys are so good.
You're so funny. But I guess the question comes to mind of, okay, how do I frame this properly? Okay, I'll ask you up front, because do you believe there's a difference between biological sex and gender?
I was just going to ask the question.
I ruined it.
No, you did not. I was actually just going to ask, not specifically in that way, but I was going to say, what is a boy and what is a girl?
Yeah, because what you said was like, well, using intersex doesn't justify that there's a third gender. I'd be like 1,000%, because there's an infinite amount of genders because of societal expectations, right? But biologically, there tends to be 2 on average, sometimes 3. We disagree on that point, agree to disagree. But to me, also, gender is completely different because that's a societal performance that we put on.
But it's kind of interesting because so you're saying gender and sex are different, which I'll definitely address that because you're right. We should define our terms here. But at the same time, you said intersex is a third gender, which is interesting because we're talking about something biological.
No, biological gender. Yeah. I try, my apologies if I ever kind of misspeak on that. I always try to be very specific about if I'm talking about biological gender or gender, right? Biological sex or gender, because to me those are two different things. Biologically, XY chromosome, male assigned at birth, male, and what is it? 8th week, you kind of get your determined sex in as an egg, right? Something like that. I'll look up the research, right? But I'm male, right? But to me, sex and gender are totally different. And I think I get very interested when people say that they're not, because it's one of those things that, in my opinion, like you can Google, like you can get entire majors in this.
You can Google a lot of things and major in a lot of things that are not true.
Okay, that's okay.
And you probably would agree with that.
I would agree with that. But so okay, can I ask you a question off your question? Is there a difference between biological sex and gender? And if you don't think so, but other people think so, is there a reason to tell them they're wrong?
I love this question. I love this question. Oh my gosh. Well, there's so much. I'm not going to be able to like get in within my 2 minutes. Yeah. I'm not going to be able to answer the whole thing. So let's go back and forth.
Literally, I could just walk away right now. Goodbye. Go ahead.
Let me answer the first part of that question of like, is there a difference between gender and sex? And so if we look at this concept of separating gender and sex, this is not historically normal. Actually, if you go back to John Money and Alfred Kinsey and Judith Butler and kind of the origins of the ideology of queer theory back in the 60s and 70s, that concept of separating sex from gender. John Money loved to champion this. He thought that gender really was something that was nurtured. So even if you had male chromosomes, you could be nurtured into being a female. And of course, his infamous experiment on the Reimer twins, one of the boys who had a botched circumcision, John Money told the parents, said, just raise him as a girl named Barbara. He'll be totally fine.
That didn't work out, did it?
No. And it was awful. And there's so many things within that. John Money sexually molested those two boys, but then also this young boy who was raised a girl and put on estrogen knew his whole life, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, even though he had female parts. And his family finally told him, yeah, you're a man. He knew it his whole life. Anyway, both of those boys ended up committing suicide. But John Money was an awful, awful person. So was Alfred Kinsey, just a champion of things that I know that you and I both would agree are just disgusting and egregious. And both of them also, though, champion this idea that sex and gender are different, that gender is conditioned, gender is declared, gender is chosen, and sex is different. I do not agree with separating those two things. Of course, someone may not fit particular stereotypes of men. Maybe you don't like all the things traditionally men do. Same thing for girls. For example, when I was growing up, I only wanted to wear jeans and a white t-shirt. I had two older brothers. I had a weird snakes phase where I loved snakes and bugs. I probably would have loved the centipede that we were talking about earlier. And so, yeah, that probably wasn't traditional. My mom hated, I didn't want to wear dresses and bows, but I wasn't any less a girl. And a boy who might like ballet or might like pink isn't any less a boy. And I do not believe in separating those categories because our bodies tell us more about who we are than our feelings. And that's probably where we disagree. That you might believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that how you feel or what you declare, how you identify is more important than your sex, is more important than your chromosomes. And I disagree with that. I think our body tells us who we are. We don't get to tell our body who it is.
Today, I want to introduce you to PregZen, a comfortable, functional underwear line for women who can't bend down to pull their underwear up. The creator of PregZen struggled to put on her underwear during her first pregnancy due to water retention and sciatica pain. So she created underwear that you can put on without needing to bend over. Thanks to the genius hook and eye design that opens and closes on the side, anyone who struggles to put their underwear on, including those with limited mobility, pregnancy, post-surgery, and wheelchair users, can now do it easily and independently with PregZen. They have detachable period underwear, moisture-absorbing underwear, and adjustable maternity underwear that grows with the belly. The maternity underwear has built-in belly band for your comfort even. There are so many options for those who need it. Enter the code Ellen20 for 20% off their shop.
I love this. First of all, love that. Second of all, I'm so happy you brought this theory up. Third of all, for everyone that always hates me, because everyone, I don't know if you know this on social media, everyone hates me, right? Because like, the conservatives hate me because I'm this, and then a lot of the liberals hate me because I'm willing to listen.
Well, he's a very likable person.
You are
He's
so
very
likable.
Thank you.
Are you kidding me?
I love how you brought up this study, right? Because I always find myself interpreting it in the exact opposite way you just interpreted it. Are you ready for this? Okay. Let's see if you can hear
I've heard this.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let's see if you can understand my perspective on this, because to me, this is wild, but I see like that idea of you botched the circumcision. It was actually a boy, and you raised her as a girl, and you treated her like a girl, and you even gave her estrogen, right? You made her body a girl. You made her a girl. You physically manipulated her into being a girl, gave the hormones as a girl, and treated her like a girl. And she knew she was a boy. Her feelings knew.
Because of her biology.
No, because you said because we know
estrogen doesn't change your
biology. What biology?
Her chromosomes, and
chromosomes don't talk.
You know. I mean, you know what I'm talking about.
I do,
you know
but
that
I
I'm
don't.
not saying that the chromosomes are physically saying,
right? I know
I'm
what you
a
mean.
boy.
So I apologize.
But he knew who he biologically was. It wasn't that he was always really a girl and he just felt like a boy. It was that he might have had girl parts, but he knew that he was biologically, chromosomally, actually a man. And so I'm saying that you cannot run away from your biology, no matter how you change your outward appearance.
Right. So I think, so it's so interesting because, again, I think the terminology is like so important because you're like, I don't trust feelings. But to me, isn't that a feeling? Like the biology, the chromosomes affect the amount of, right? The chromosomes are going to affect the thyroid, the pituitary gland. That's going to affect the amount of hormones that you have, right? You get a boy, botch the circumcision, turn the penis into a vagina, give him the estrogen, treat him like a girl. You do everything female, including from the very kind of hormone levels. What is left making him think he's a boy?
Nature versus nurture. He knew his nature.
Okay. So would you say that's a feeling?
Based on reality, the difference between I think the difference between someone who is, say, born a girl and thinks that she is a boy, that her feeling is based on something that isn't true. It's not true. It's not true at the cellular level. It's not true in her body. She's feeling in the same way that I can't say I identify as a tree. Now, maybe you would respect my pronouns if I said I identify as a tree. It doesn't make it true.
Right, 1,000%.
And so he felt something that was biologically correct. I'm not saying all feelings are bad, but we have to ground feelings in reality. And when you feel that you are the opposite sex of what you actually are, that is not real.
Right. So first of all, physically, you're right? Because you physically feel like you're something that you're not. Right? Like you said, that it's not real. But unless of course you want to move on, if we feel like we've exhausted the point, I just get a little confused because that idea of realness of the situation.
Well, this goes into the next question, I think, which is gender dysmorphia a mental illness?
Yeah.
So let's answer that one.
Well, so what I could appreciate is, first, before moving on, I could appreciate that maybe this is more of like a methodology kind of normative conversation, because there's studies and there's things that say it's not a mental illness, and we have the studies to prove that. But I enjoy talking to you and I appreciate your perspective, right? I think, studies aside, because we do have studies that say that it's not a mental illness necessarily, right? Can I ask, for me, right? Like, let's put me on the table, because I don't know. I kind of like you. Like, I would hang out with you. I understand that we don't have everything in common. I think you're a good person. You seem nice. I was 13 and I started growing facial hair, right? That did not work for me. I was a mess. I was a total mess, right? My mom's like, shave it off. It's not that big of a deal. I'm like, I can't. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, it's not what I'm supposed to do. Like, that's wrong. Like, I'm not the type of person that is supposed to shave my face. There's something wrong. And but it's like you said, like, physically, Desmond, you XY chromosome, biologically male, you got the shot of testosterone, you're gonna grow facial hair. It was wrong. I walked around, total gender dysphoria, right? She had to shave for me, laser hair removal at 16.
I bet that was really hard.
Want to know something? Up until the laser hair removal, And then it was great.
Mm-hmm. But to feel at first that feeling of panic and like
Yeah.
not feeling at home in your own body, I'm sure was really hard.
Awful. Was truly terrible. And I appreciate you saying that, right? Like that was awful. I was in a body and I was like, this is wrong. There's something wrong about this. And this is going to this is going to open up a huge can of worms. Okay. Get ready for this.
Okay.
So, and I want your perspective on this.
Okay.
This is so like, you're not allowed to talk about what I'm about to talk about. Right. So like, get ready to be totally canceled for this. Right?
Okay.
One is, would you have let me get laser hair removal at 16? Right. And then 2, here's the crazy part. I was allowed to get laser hair removal. I was allowed to wear makeup when I wanted to. When I was 13, I got to wear mascara. I got laser hair removal at 16. At 30, I can get the hair feminizing treatment. I've never wanted to fully transition because whenever part of my body didn't align with how I was feeling, I was able to address that because everyone was open with me. Would you be worried if I was in a more what's called conservative, but I think that's using conservative as a negative term and I don't like doing that. If I was put in a different family where they were like, nope, men grow facial hair, you need a mustache, you need this hairline, and you need to dress like this. What if I thought that I was like trans and I did the full surgery when I didn't need it?
You were raised, I think you said before the interview, by 2 moms, right?
2 moms separated.
2 moms
So
separated.
single, yeah.
And so I'm just curious, before I even am so curious about your story. So when you were going through puberty and you had these questions, did you feel like you had someone to, like, do you feel like your moms understood?
Did. Shout out to Philip. So I come from a family of educators, right? They're all teachers. So I had a lot of male role models in my life, right? Ones that came over, taught me how to shave, taught me how to play basketball, taught me how to play soccer. Shout out to the Jackson's family, Mark Jackson, who was a father to me, Philip, who would come over every single day. They're all educators, so they know the importance, right? I was one of the first actual cases, if you could believe it, 1994, where my moms were separated, but one was pregnant, and the court actually deems better interest of the child to have 2 parents, even if 2 of them are moms. No single mom on this one. You guys got joint custody, right? So they're very aware, and my family was always very aware that I had a good amount of male role models, right? It still was wrong. And I think what's the most fascinating part,
Wait,
right?
what was wrong?
There was still something wrong with the facial hair. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what, a lot of people, and I'm so happy I'm able to like actually talk to you guys about this because you'll actually listen, is people hear like, oh, I had 2 moms. And people are like, oh, that explains. There we go, right? Oh my God, my moms don't wear makeup. Have you ever met lesbians before? That was a joke. But they're not. This is the exact opposite of them, right? But I did have people. I had all guy friends. Despite the makeup and physical appearance, you might be surprised to hear I was the kid that was in every single sports thing, playing paintball and airsoft with my friends and rolling around, right? But the facial hair was wrong.
And that was the first time that you felt like, wow, I don't feel comfortable in my body, or did it start before that?
It started before when. First of all, this is a great question. I don't know if this is answering any of your questions, but it's us getting to know each other.
We'll get to it.
So what about me?
So before facial hair,
Before facial hair, right? This idea of I really liked painting my nails when I was 4, right? Mm-hmm. They told me at school that I wasn't allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. I listened, by the way, no more. I had to wear clear nail polish, right? But I think that was the first memory I ever had of, I like to do something with my body that wasn't allowed. Now, at the same time, being a Black individual in a majority, Marin County, mostly white area, I always was very cognizant of how my body was different. I was one of the 2 Black people that went to my entire middle school, right? But the facial hair really stood out to me. Even though so I'm wondering, how would you as a mom, whose opinion I respect and is articulate and seems like a lot, how would you deal with it? Because I felt like they dealt with it well.
Yeah, it's hard to speak in hypotheticals.
Yeah, so real.
Hypotheticals like that. I don't know that I would do laser hair removal.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what I would do. But I also wouldn't, I think you gave the example, and I'm sure you were purposely speaking hyperbolically, but I also wouldn't say like you have to have like a beard and like facial hair and you have to like go 4-wheeling right now, like rub some dirt on it. I don't think that's right either. I think that here's what I believe about any kind of dysphoria, or any time that a girl or guy looks in the mirror and they say, for whatever reason, whether it's weight or whether it's facial hair or whether it's some kind of gender expression that their body has manifested through puberty, rather than saying, you know what, we are going to, change the physical to try to match your mental state or what you desire, my aim would be to try to reconcile their mind with what their body naturally is. Now, I think that there are some differences. Like, I'm not against necessarily, I don't think like highlights or something like that.
Well, that's what I was gonna say.
Yes. And I think that there are some conversations there. So I'm not saying it's black and white in every regard, but I would want to know the motivation. Like, okay, do you want highlights because let's just use that for an example, because you hate your hair and you hate the hair color that God gave you, and you are trying to look like Susie Q over here who told you that your hair is mousy, because those are not good reasons. Do you want laser hair removal because you don't like that, God made you a boy, or you don't like that you are male and you're trying to reject that about yourself? Okay, let's talk through that. That's going to take a process of us trying to reconcile and make peace with your mind with your body. And so making any kind of like permanent change, or making any change, I think, that affirms that they are like the opposite gender than what they actually are, I would see that as wrong and harmful. So no, I would not encourage that. But again, that also doesn't mean that I'm going to push a son or a daughter into every gender stereotype that exists. But I would do everything I can to help them make peace with their physical body.
Okay, so ready for me to like totally go ADHD on you, actually diagnosed, right?
I'm ready.
Totally like changing subjects to bringing up something that you said before, right?
Okay, sure.
Which is what you just described, right? Like, first of all, like, we're like the same age. So like, but I'm like, okay, I would, if you were my mom in that situation, you were like, hey, let's not do the laser hair right away. Let's talk this through. Do you not, is it because you have, what's the reason? I think that should be the conversation in every situation, right? And like you said, I don't think that people should be societally pressured into making certain choices, right? I don't think boys are supposed to like this and girls are supposed to like this. So if you don't like those things, you're trans, go get the surgery. That's wrong.
That's harmful. Totally.
That is so harmful and promotes problematic societal stereotypes, right? But then it just makes me think of something
I wanted to bring up was not long ago when I was growing up, the progressive way to think was, if a boy wants to put on a dress, or a girl wants to be a tomboy, don't worry, guys. Like, she's still a girl and he's still a boy. Right. But now it seems like the conversation has shifted the more progressive thing to think now is, if a boy puts on a dress, or just wants to put on his mom's makeup, we should say, oh, are you feeling like you're
some
a girl?
Type of way?
But also it makes me think about wider perspectives of, why is it that makeup is a feminine thing? And why is it that wearing a dress, I just think it's an interesting conversation. Why is it that if a man wears a dress, it's like a very big deal, but if a woman wears a pantsuit, that's not a big deal? Is this a societal thing, like a cultural thing? What makes something feminine, what makes something masculine, and how, that's just such an interesting conversation.
It's such a cultural problem. Okay, hear me out. And this is me hyper-focusing, right? Just so you know, you're talking to somebody with high anxiety, right? And when I have conversations, and I call them conversations, I don't call these debates, right? I want to believe you. And then you said that thing where you're like, well, boys and girls bring different things and are supposed to complement each other. Right? You said that. And to me, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, if she thinks that boys and girls are supposed to complement each other in a certain way, and I don't fit that, then I have to say I'm not in that binary. I'm non-binary. Now, if you don't come to the conversation with that expectation, and boys can do whatever the heck they want, girls can do whatever the heck they want, and look however the heck you want, you can call me whatever the hell you want. I go by he, him, because it never bothered me to go by he, him. I don't need, not that other people's pronouns are irrelevant. Not that other people's pronouns are irrelevant, but for he, him never bothered me as a kid. Why would I need to be called they, them just because there's a new terminology for it? But if you put me, and I think I could speak for some non-binary individual, in a binary where we are supposed to be assigned a gender, which is determined in utero, but then assigned a gender, and then there's a certain way we're supposed to complement the other gender. Okay. Then I gotta be like, well, I'm not gonna fit that. You gotta label me something that lets you know that I'm not gonna fit that. Right? So that's I think the only qualm I have with the situation.
Okay. So at that point, I was talking about in the context of reproduction, and biologically we do complement each other. Okay. Even two men or two women who are together, you need a sperm, you need an egg, you have that. Of course, I believe that God made it that way very purposely. But yes, I actually do believe that our biology tells us something about who we are. That doesn't mean that a man will fit every gender stereotype. A man can be gentle. He can be peaceful. He can be, kind and genteel, all of that stuff. He can also be aggressive, assertive, rough and tumble, and things like that. And a similar dichotomy is true, and a similar spectrum is true for women. I don't believe that every man and every woman has to fit into a particular stereotype. But in general, I do believe, and of course, we're talking about rules and generalities, which I understand is like really hard to do both in conversation and on social media, because there's an exception and a nuance to every rule. We understand that. But in general, men and women's, our biology, how our minds are formed differently from an early age, how testosterone and puberty affects the minds, all of these things, that does mean that in general, men and women bring different things to the table. Like there are reasons why, even in very progressive countries, you see a difference in professions, why women tend to take the helping profession, why they tend to be teachers, tend to be nurses, tend to be caretakers, and men tend to be the mechanics. They tend to be the engineers. Does that mean there's no female engineers and no male nurses?
Of course not.
No. But I do believe that our biology and how our minds work as men and women are different.
Scientifically proven.
Yes.
Scientifically
and
proven.
Generally, and that's what I mean by complement.
Right.
Is that
that
we tend to have different strengths and different weaknesses as men and women. Some of them are the same. Some of them are very different. Some of them are based on personality type. Some of them are based on your faith. But some of them are also based on your sex.
Did you know, have you heard about, have you heard about the first wave of puberty? It's actually like 1 year old, right? One and a half.
The what?
First wave of puberty for boys. Have you heard about this? It's crazy.
No, I don't think so.
Oh my gosh. So if you could believe it, I almost said male assigned at birth, but I want to be also respectful of how you understand it. Like boys in general, there's a wave of testosterone that hits at age 1. That girls just don't have, right? And it's it's so
and then
interesting.
It goes down,
and then it totally it does
until
decrease.
puberty, and
then it goes back up. It doesn't completely flatline. It stays higher, and it's always interesting. You get that idea of, I'm happy we're having this conversation, right? That idea of people think, biology is completely irrelevant. It's just the reproductive organs. We know that's scientifically not true, right? That's scientifically You can look at the neuroscience behind this, and it's completely wrong, right?
In the womb, there's differences.
There's complete differences, right?
Even the breast milk for moms, the composition is different based on male, female babies.
Right. And that idea of the tendencies, right? You said there's this general average, right? Now, here's an example that I would want both of your opinions on, right? We got the fight, flight, freeze, or friend response, right? Just classic how we deal with danger, right? I've always been a friender. Classic female trait, right? That's how I behave in situations like this. With somebody who has a different opinion, I'm like, let's get to know the person. Let's make them, understand me. I'll understand them. We won't fight it out. We won't freeze. We won't run away. Let's become friends in this situation. Very female quality. Most females have this quality as opposed to the fight, much more of a male quality. Not to be sexist, biologically true. So when you have a male like me that is more prone to some of the female qualities, do we just leave me alone? Would it be beneficial to give oh yeah, he's non-binary, or just let me be in, you know what I mean? Does a label need to be given? Because otherwise I feel there's sometimes an expectation. Yeah.
I think just as I said a few minutes ago that there's a difference between a stereotype in your sex, there's a difference in a personality in your sex. Okay. And so my concern isn't really about someone's personality or what their interests are, or whether or not they have a friendlier personality that someone might associate with being feminine. Right. My biggest concern is that we are drawing distinctions and differences based on biology. Now, we might disagree on how that should manifest itself roles in society and things like that. And that there's going to be a disagreement there. And some of that has to do with what I believe biblically.
Right, of course.
But my biggest concern is protecting spaces and rights and teams and all that stuff. We'll probably get to the athletic stuff. Based on sex and also just reality. And you haven't done this, but I don't want to be forced to or to be pressured to call a man she just because he puts some lipstick on and says, this is how I identify. The only person who can speak something into creation is God. We don't have that ability. And I think that your biology trumps your declarations. Maybe not for you individually, and I can't tell you what you want to call yourself and what your friends and family call you, but I think this whole like push to emotionally manipulate people into calling you they, them, not you, or she, her, when that is not who you biologically are. In some cases, don't even biologically like look like.
Got it.
That is an affront to truth. And I also think it's an affront to women's rights.
Oh, okay.
So can you answer though directly if you believe that gender dysphoria is a mental illness?
Oh, I don't even know if we ever like
I think
actually
it's like there's just, you guys are
Okay.
having, it's like such a beautiful conversation.
Gender
I would like to
dysphoria.
get some
So
of these.
it is included in the DSM. It is included in the DSM-5, and the DSM-5, of course, is the big manual that we have on mental illnesses. But there's actually some like corruption and back end conversation that we could have about the insurance companies and the psychologists and the psychiatrists and how they decide upon this. And there's always politics. There's always politics. And so you're probably right that there are studies that say, no, it's not a mental disorder. And then there are obviously like the DSM-5 and literature throughout history that says, gender dysphoria is described in general as like an insistent and persistent and consistent feeling of being in the wrong body. And several years ago, the statistic was something like 0.2% of boys feel that they are in the wrong body. They have this gender dysphoria. It used to be called gender dysmorphia. And then we recognize that, wait, this is happening later in life all of a sudden, and this is happening in girls, and this is different. And so, of course, there's been studies by, I think her name is Lisa Littman, is that her name? From Brown University, who did the study that coined the term rapid onset gender dysphoria,
which is
the
new.
social contagion.
That's new.
Well, it's new because the phenomenon of teenagers and especially teenage girls identifying as the opposite sex is very new. So gender dysphoria was absolutely seen as a mental illness, in that, of course, you are something, you think that you're something else. And just like a lot of other mental illnesses, when your mind isn't reconciled with reality, okay, there's something going on there. We used to know that there needs to be a change in the mind, not a change in the body. But now we've kind of run the opposite direction.
Okay, what do you think?
I don't know, right? And like, so like that's and I hope that it's okay to like be honest, right?
Yes.
But that idea of like, I'm not sure, right? Because that's like pulling from two strings, right? Because part of me is like, well, being gay was considered a mental illness, and I don't believe that. And I don't mean to like make that argument because I know that you have faith and I don't know your feelings on that yet, right? But it is my personal belief that like being gay is not a mental illness. But I had gender dysphoria. I know that wasn't fun. That wasn't a mentally good part of my life. I would consider that I was a little bit upset. I would consider that a mental illness. A mental illness, just like autism, where the person is not bad, wrong, terrible, but needs extra support. So part of me thinks, yeah, sure, definitely qualify it as a mental illness. Other part of me gets worried about qualifying it as a mental illness, like we qualified homosexuality. So I can't even give you like I definitely believe this perspective on
Well,
that
to
one.
make maybe a little bit easier to define it, if somebody wanted to identify with a different race, would you consider that a mental illness?
It's a really good question, right? And I actually, I addressed somebody who said this, right? Where the idea of like, well, what about transracial, right? And there's a big flaw in that, in my opinion. And I'd love to know your perspective, right? Where this conversation, in my opinion, generally works because we have an understanding that scientifically there is a biological difference between men and women, right? Physically, hormonally, there's a difference. Trans individuals, in my opinion, gain validity because they say, I identify more with the other than what's in front of me. What are transracial people saying? Like, you feel more black? That's racist. It's just skin deep when it comes to race, right?
So why is that racist? But a man saying, oh, putting on a lipstick and wearing a skirt is the same thing as being a woman. Because I see that as misogynist.
Right. So, okay, hear me out. Right. Oh, okay. So hear me out. To me, one is, and I know we have different feelings on the word feeling. One is a feeling, right? Like that idea of, okay, I feel more like, if you asked me, Desmond, what makes you feel non-binary? I go, well, I have some characteristics that I feel biologically are just more female, more ability to friend, more communicative as opposed to aggressive, situations like that. Even my, mental conditions, right? ADHD and, OCD, they present usually more of the female diagnostics as opposed to the male diagnostics, but I'm biologically male. So there are some biological traits of female that I align with more, and therefore I consider myself kind of outside the binary. I'm playing in a different game. If that's confusing, you don't have to use that. Now, if someone went up to me and was like, well, I just feel more black. And I'm like, what does that mean? And they're like, well, black people just tend to act more this way. I'd be like, what? Like, that's extremely racist, right? And I understand what you're saying.
But is it if you're saying positive things? I mean, obviously, we know there are more Black NBA players.
Right.
So if someone said, well, I'm really good at basketball and I'm a great singer, I'm a great dancer, and, I really like movies and humor that has all Black people in it. And I just... Whenever I look in the mirror and, oh gosh, don't clip this. This is hypothetical.
Can you imagine the amount of clips that I've gotten? That's so funny.
No, I know you wouldn't. I'm not talking to you, but
just wait.
People out there. No,
Yeah.
but if someone looked in the mirror and they said, wow, I really see a Black person and I really want to be that and I feel that on the inside. I don't identify with my family. I don't identify with this culture. I love Black culture. I love their food. I love their entertainment. And they think that they're that and they feel so uncomfortable in the color of their skin. Right. Why would that be racist? Why is that not valid?
Well, see, again, because to me, you brought up like that idea of like culture, right? But there isn't really. Right? Like if you look at it from an anthropological level, right? There's kind of Black institutions, right? But, I'm Nigerian, right? We're taken from Nigeria. We're made into like slavery, right? That idea of like each Black culture looks different based on geographical location, right? And you're going to appreciate, not to put words in your mouth, you're going to appreciate this somewhat. Some female characteristics are plural. No matter where you go, that's female. Like no matter from India to the United States to South America, that's female. Black looks different everywhere. Nigerian is very different than Zambian, which is very different than South Carolina Black culture, which is very different than Black California culture, right? Black always looks different, right? There's no kind of one other than the skin tone, the melanin. That's what makes you Black, right? So if someone was like, I just feel more Black because it's just more of my vibe. And I'm like, well, the hell vibe is that? When I say I'm non-binary,
you're kind of doing that with gender, though. Okay, because you're saying, "See, I'm more friendly. I'm OCD. I'm ADHD." And I'm like, "Well, geez, I'm not any of those things."
So sorry, excuse me.
So you're kind of stereotyping.
No, I want to clarify. So if you could believe it, right? Sorry, not if you could believe it, because that's like talking down to someone. That idea of like ADHD, there are female diagnostic traits and male diagnostic traits for ADHD. Not saying all women have ADHD, but it presents itself differently in boys and girls. I have a little bit more of the female qualities than the male qualities on average, right? Not saying all, but like on average, biologically, we see women sometimes just act in certain ways and do certain things because we were talking about like that neurochemistry, right? So that idea of, okay, well, if I find myself doing that, maybe I should qualify myself in a way that lets people know. Not for myself, to let you know. Right? Like, hey, to let you know, like, oh, Desmond's coming on the podcast. He's non-binary. That might give the idea of like, oh, well, he might come in with lipstick. He might come in acting like this. Now, with that said, just because I like to agree on a point. You can't throw on lipstick and be like, I'm a girl now. Because that's not about feeling. That's ridiculous, right? Or to stereotype.
But why?
It.
Can you describe to me?
Same reason you can't spray tan yourself and say I'm Black.
Okay.
That's wrong. That's surface level.
But break that down for me, because it does sound like, so correct me where I've gotten this wrong. It does sound like you're saying kind of feelings are authoritative when it comes to someone's gender. So if someone told you, hey, like if I told you, okay, I look like this, but I said, no, my pronouns are he, him, and I am a man. And that's what I feel. Yeah. And I've never felt like that, but I feel like it right now. Yeah. Would you say, okay, that's totally valid?
Would I say it's valid, or would I respect your pronouns?
Well, you just said a man can't just put on lipstick and say that I'm a woman. You would say that's ridiculous. Yeah. I'm trying to understand, like, why is that ridiculous? What's your qualification for what counts as a valid
That's a great
identity?
So, okay, I want you to answer, and then I want to get back to children.
Oh, yeah.
So, I love this, but answer that, and then I have a question
now
about
kids. I see, like, at first I was like, I don't know how long we're going to be able to go. I feel like we're just going to get through this. No. And I'm like, no, we could talk for 5 hours.
Literally. Quickly answering that is that that idea of, like, if you said, I'm a man, call me he, him, right? I would have thought, I would call you he, him for the rest of this podcast. That's just me as a person.
Yeah.
and maybe you can come to terms with this either based on your faith or based on you as kind of a kind person. I don't have the authority to validate you or declare you valid or not. Like, that's not up to me.
But you just said it's ridiculous if a man puts on lipstick and says that he's a woman. Why?
Yeah, right. But like in this specific situation, right? That is ridiculous, right? Because that's stereotyping the entire general population, right? But you specifically asked about the pronouns and if you're valid, right? If a man threw on lipstick right now and said, I'm a woman, I'd be like, okay, is it just because of the lipstick or it's because of your feeling? It's just because of the lipstick. That's sexist. That's devaluing
Okay, but
women.
you're saying that if a man, whether or not he puts on lipstick, but say he's lived his whole life 40 years as a man, he's sired children, and then he all of a sudden says he is a woman, like that person is, in your mind, that identity is just as valid as, say, me being a woman.
No. Well, it's just as valid. Yes. It's just as valid.
Okay, let's define our terms. What do you mean by valid?
Right? Right? It is just as valid, but totally different. She Totally different.
Okay.
That's equating two completely different things, right?
But
that's a trans woman experience that should be valued. She lived his, see, you and I, right? She, if she lived her life 40 years as a man, had children, and then she realized that she was she, I would call her she for the rest of her life. And that is a valid experience that is so different than yours. And I don't think her experience takes away from the validity of your experience and every sexist, horrible thing you've had to put up with since the age of 2 or earlier that she did not have to put up with. And there needs to be a differentiation in that, because then you're right. If we both treat you with respect, that's great. But if we treat you two as though you have had the same experience, that devalues your experience as an assigned female at birth and devalues her experience as a trans woman and the struggle she went through.
Unfortunately, and I don't know if you agree with this, I know we want to get back to children, but I'm just so curious, like, the motto, trans women are women, like that's the rallying cry. So it does conflate the two, because it's not, and that's not only in theory, that's also, we see that in practice. Like, because, okay, you're making the distinction between the two people, but that man who now identifies as a woman is coming into my bathroom, my locker room, playing, I mean, maybe not at the age of 40, but, playing on the sports team of my daughters. Right. And so we are being conflated as the same thing. There probably wouldn't be as much pushback if these people who decided to identify as the opposite sex were like, you know what, we just want our own category. We want to be
it's so sorry putting on the subject of children, right? Can we just do men's bathrooms, women's bathrooms, then neutral, and then family bathrooms, please? Like just 4 or 3, just men, women,
So do you agree
families.
with that phrase, trans women are women?
Trans women are a type of women. Does that count? Like, are they the same? Or like, see, you got to specify, because for me, that's where I get into the waters that I'll never go into, right? Like that idea. So, yeah.
No, this is good. It's great. It's great. But I think we can go to the next question.
Okay, I'm picky about bedding and loungewear. I'm picky about comfort in general, especially when I'm traveling and when it comes to bringing comfort along on my summer travels. Cozy Earth is my top choice, because as much as I want to be cozy, I also want to feel luxurious overall. Experience the unparalleled softness of Cozy Earth, designed to keep you cozy and comfortable in any climate. No matter if you're exploring exotic locales or simply unwinding at home, Cozy Earth bedding and loungewear has you covered and is so beautiful. And here's the best part.
Their luxury pajamas are so incredibly soft, with the perfect flattering fit for bedtime, made from high quality fabrics designed for comfort and guaranteed to improve your sleep.
Their products are built to last. With a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty, you could trust that your travel companion will stand the test of time. Trust me, once you try it, you'll never want to take it off. Ready to prioritize your self-care and sleep on the road? Head to CozyEarth.com and use the code ELLEN35 for 35% off your purchase.
Okay, so has transitioning become a social media trend? According to a 2021 survey by the CDC, kids who identify as LGBTQ now make up of about 25% of high school students. when I grew up, graduating in 2005, no one, like, it was literally unheard of.
So rare.
In my high school.
Now I'm
No one identified with that.
I would have been so cool. Like, now I was such a loser 20 years ago. Yeah.
So it was basically unheard of back then. So what do you think are the main factors that have caused such a rise in identifying as LGBT? Why don't you go first?
Okay. So you brought up social contagion. We do have a couple studies that are showing that's not as prevalent as we think it is, right? The idea of like social contagion that I you brought this up earlier, but
how would we know?
That's a great question, right? My mind is going in two different ways. And
I know, I have that problem all the time.
Right. But I would say one thing that we know for sure is that, like you said, not all, you said, cultures, we usually have two genders. Not all cultures, right? We got two-spirited. And then even the queer studies that you kind of quoted were very Eurocentric studies, right? We're very, very Eurocentric. And then to America, that idea of like, there's two and these are the gender roles. Those gender roles were definitely like a more colonist gender role that was even put on African countries that we still see in this day, right? Now, I don't want to get too into that because then I feel like we start going into like the colonizing thing and that just throws a whole group of people under the bus in a way that needs to be explored further, right? You know what I'm talking about. But I think this idea of why is it trending, right? That idea of, can something become more socially acceptable and then more people realize they are that thing, right? Is that a possibility? Or do you think it's a trend? Because, right, I hope you believe me, don't want it to trend. Right? I know there's this, and there's nothing I could do for anyone watching this right now. To you two, you might believe me because I hope you understand me as a person. I do not need more gay kids. I don't need more queer kids. And if you are gay and queer or trans and you're a trans kid, awesome. But if you're not, I don't care, right? Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but keeping up with this type of lifestyle is validating and I'm proud of who I am. And it's also not easy. Right? Like, it's not something that you do for fun, right? So I certainly hope it's not trending. I certainly hope that more kids are just realizing that this describes their experience more and they're identifying with it, right? Just like, there was actually a podcast where it's like that idea of like left-handedness, right? All of a sudden the church became okay with left-handedness. Everyone spikes, I'm identifying as being left-handed. And then it tapers off because, right? I certainly hope there's not a trend, right? I certainly hope that people just realize, it's more socially acceptable to be non-binary, transgender, queer. And then hopefully we're going to taper off because I don't want it to trend because that's not truthful. The feelings need to be, and it also delegitimizes actual experience, right? If I go, hey, I grew up, I've always felt like this. I didn't like to shave. I felt this way. I liked hanging out with these girls, but these boys, and this experience speaks to me. And then someone's like, same, but I'm a tree. I'm like, okay, so you took my thing and you made it like, you know what I mean? Like, no offense to the tree self people out there. I'm not saying I understand. I'll call you a tree if you want me to, but you're like, I won't call you a tree. But like, what do you think? What do you think is causing it? Is it popular?
Yeah, I think that these are the two different perspectives. Right. One is, no, we're just more accepting. Right. And so more people are coming out as who they truly are. And then the other perspective is the one that I lean toward more, although I think it can probably be a little bit of like both and, that yes, it has become popular. And just as there are and have been like many social contagions, especially among young people, when you're in those formative years, you're trying to fit in, you want to be like everyone else. Eating disorders have been a social contagion. Cutting has been a social contagion. And I do think to a degree that having some kind of obscure or different identity can be a social contagion. And I think the idea, and you didn't say this, and we probably agree, that it would be ridiculous to say it can never be a social contagion. And it is absolutely not a social contagion. It's like, how do you know that? Why is this the only 100% objective, valid choice that a young person can make that no adult can question? And that is how it's treated today.
I go into schools and
you can't question it.
I go into schools and actually work with kids on this because the reason I'm sometimes hired by public institutions, I love the schools that I work with and we're not going to give out those names, right? But that idea of the schools kind of are afraid of them sometimes because they're like, we can't tell the kids that they're not, or we can't tell the kids no, but the kids are like yelling at the teachers when they get misgendered, right? And it's a problem. And I agree with you that saying it's never a trend is ridiculous. Like that's insane. Of course things have trended, right? It was a trend to pretend that you were straight for years on end, right? It was a trend to pretend that you weren't non-binary. It was a trend that I didn't wear nail polish for a majority of my life because I was told that was wrong. Those were all trends, right? That's what we call heteronormative behavior. But sometimes it's real to me, right?
Well, I do agree that there are like feelings can be real, whether or not I agree with them or whether or not I think they correlate with reality. I do think that there are probably some kids who maybe they've been feeling that way since they were little, before they even went into school. Right. And then they realize, okay, I'm not going to get in trouble for this. And so I'm more likely to do it. But yeah, I do think it's a little both and on that. I do just want to say one little thing.
And then I want to tell you a story too, if it's okay.
About the cultural thing, because I always hear this, that it was, I know we're not going to get into the colonizer thing because that's neither here nor there. We could have another debate about that.
Oh, we'll come back soon.
But I just wanted to clarify something that I said, is that I didn't say that all cultures for all of time have had the same gender roles, but for all of human history, we have been sexually dimorphic beings, and we have recognized, like, whether or not you agree with the authority of the Bible as a spiritual guide or as the word of God, it was still historically factually written 6,000 years ago in the East. And in the very first chapter, the first book of the Bible, it says God made them male and female. Whether or not you believe that that's true, that God made us, it still is true that that was written 6,000 years ago in the non-colonized, non-Western world. And so I just want to say that the reality of male and female can be traced back thousands of years before the West, of course, before America, and in lots of different cultures. Either way, whether cultures recognize it or not, though, biology is still real.
That's so real. Yeah, biology can be traced back even millions of years, right? The gender roles are a little different. But going back to the point, right, is that, now hear me out. I want your take on this. I'll tell a little story. We're going to leave all names out of it because I am a professional, and because of FERPA, I can't ever get rid of, student names, right? But I have a lot of students, right? I'm on TikTok, so I have virtual students. I have students that are in person, and I'll give you a little story, and I want to know what you think about this. Student comes in, intake, and mom's, I'd love to work with you. Okay, they need a little bit of math help. It's like, oh, I really look forward to meeting her. My daughter goes by they, them. So, oh, my apologies. She comes in the office. They come in the office. Long hair, very female presenting.
Looks like a girl.
What I have associated with looking like a girl throughout my life, right? Doesn't really give off the vibes, right? I'm asking, oh, well, what established your, I'm like, okay. And do you know what I do? Leave it. I leave it alone. I call them they, them. And the parents call them they, them. And we just leave it at that. And when I mess up on their pronouns, they correct me and I apologize. And when people come into the office and they misgender them, we correct them. And then do you know what happened? Hey, Desmond, I was really thinking about it and I realized that they, them doesn't really fit me. I am she, her. Thanks so much. Done. Why can't we do that? Like that was, I knew from the beginning, right? I mean, not saying I knew from the beginning. I knew from the beginning. But that idea of like, I'm like, okay, sorry. Like I know what gender dysphoria was. I know what this was. I know how this looks. I know what the feelings are. I know how vital you fight just to exist peacefully within the societal context and yourself. And I'm looking at you and you are not in the same fight as me. But why don't I just respect it? Because if I just respect it, then maybe you'll figure it out on your own. Because I know as a teacher, if I push back on something, a kid pushes in the harder in the other direction. So what about you as parents? Because I know your experience as parents is different. For me, when a kid is doing something that I know may not be correct, let them explore it. They'll figure it out. Why not?
Yeah, because
aside from medical intervention right away, because I know where you're going to go with that, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes, that's not what I was going to say. I do think that social affirmation from the studies that we've seen, and I know both of us keep on saying like studies, and it's so hard when we don't have the sources in front of us, but that social affirmation can then be like the gateway that leads someone to say, okay, like I'm going to affirm myself with hormones XYZ. And of course, I think that's harmful. But for me, fundamentally, I see it as a lie because both of us, we have a different perspective perspective is you see gender and sex as independent, whereas you think someone's gender can be valid as female or she, even if they were born male. I don't see a separation. There is not a separation in my perspective between those two things. So to call someone them, or to call someone that I know is a female, he, him, would be lying. And then from my theological perspective, because I believe that God made them male or female, and because the first chapter of the Bible says that God made us in his image, male and female, he created them. To me, that is like an affront to the creator of the universe, the God who created them with so much value and intentionality and purpose. And because I want to affirm that being a girl or being a boy is good, even in those awkward, really difficult puberty years, I am not going to affirm a lie, even just from like a principle perspective. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be, I might avoid use of pronouns altogether. I might just say
right?
you,
I love that.
or use the name, or it might not. But if it comes down to it,
I do that
if
sometimes.
it comes down to it, and I am made to have a conversation with them, or I have to confront it if they're like, you know, why aren't you calling me they, them? Then I will say, look, I understand that's how you feel right now, but I can't lie to you. You are a female. I understand that that might offend you. I don't want to offend you. I'm not trying to push you away, but I can't lie. Now, that might make them really mad. You might be right. They might run the other direction, which is not what I want. But at the same time, like, I always think of that, like, that quote by Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet dissident, who said, like, let the lie triumph, but let it not triumph through me. And because I see gender ideology as destructive, I see using the wrong pronouns as assenting to an entire ideology and framework that I see as really destructive in the lives and the bodies of young people, and in the lives and the privacy and the rights and protection of women.
Love all the points that you just made. Don't necessarily agree with all of them, but I really like how they were like articulated. Can I just take a piece of like what you were saying? Because there was so much that made sense to me, and then also so much that I don't necessarily see eye to eye with you on. But maybe that idea of like, you used they, them so beautifully so many times in that, right? Like, why not just... Right, when we didn't know the gender of the individual.
Yeah,
you
when
like,
you don't know. And that's true. That has been grammatically true for a long time, that you say they when you don't know.
When you don't know.
But I'm talking about when you know. When you know.
Right.
When you know it's a male, when you know it's a female. That's when it goes into being a lie.
Is it important to qualify people as like their gender every time we refer to them? What if that makes them uncomfortable?
Well, no, and that's what I said. I
But
said
you did say
when
that.
it's
You did.
not.
I'm not saying you did.
When
Right,
it's
sorry.
not necessary, I'm
Yeah.
not going to go out of my way to like be like, "Hey, dude," for a guy. Like, I'm not going to go out of my way to offend them. But if it comes down to it, and I'm put in a situation, I'm not going to lie. That's what it comes down to. It's not trying to purposely offend them or hurt them, but I'm not going to lie on their behalf, even if it does make them feel better.
Okay. Well, I was just going to, let's see. Gosh, you know what? No, because I get your point, right? Because to you, it's a gateway of a whole bunch of other problems. Well, to me, it's simply like a gateway for intervention that is a benefit. So it's like the gateway, but we think that, you think it's going to lead to a whole bunch of issues. Well, I think it could lead to solutions, right? Or it'll
and you
taper
see it
itself
as
out.
just personal respect in that moment.
And I also think, hey, this respect, in my opinion, can lead to you not making drastic decisions. I call you they, them. You realize it's not right for you. You realize you're she, her. You don't go on the testosterone, right? Or you do, and that's okay with me too, which I know you're not okay with, and that's okay, right? But yes, what were you going to say?
Okay, so the next question I have is there a medical consensus on the efficacy of what's called gender-affirming care for transgender youth? And does a medical consensus always equate to what's right and true? Is the medical community pushing gender transition for financial gain?
I would definitely say, because I know that you've said a few times, like endocrinologists are saying this, psychologists are saying this, pediatricians are saying this. And gosh, if you go, and I've done like too much research into this to where it's like, I'm sure that you have subjects like this where you're like, I know too much for my own good.
Sanity.
And I'm not saying that I know everything by any means when it comes to all of this, but when you go down the path of the big money behind big medicine, including endocrinology, including testosterone and estrogen, and all of the quote unquote gender affirming care, which I hate that term when it comes to the procedures, it is big money. It's big money. And when you look at WPATH, the organization that really sets the medical standards for transition and where they are actually getting their research, some of their research is actually from the chat rooms of men who get together and talk about their fantasies of forcing boys into transition. And so there's all kinds of things that I could talk about there. But WPATH, the AAP, the FDA, even the CDC, endocrinologists, I mean, all of these groups, I absolutely think, along with the insurance companies, are financially incentivized to push kids into transition. I'm not saying every single doctor is that way, but certainly the cosmetic surgeries make big, big money. There was a big story out of Vanderbilt where one of the professors was saying, you know, one of these top surgeries, double mastectomy, can make us anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000. I mean, there was Kaiser Permanente in Oakland, California, this psychiatrist saying, I think the youngest youngest patient that I recommended for top surgery was 12 years old. That's insane. And of course, it's making them a ton of money. And so, yeah, it's just like anything else. The difference here is that the damage is young kids who I don't believe can consent to this.
Right. Wow. So I think that, sorry, like I'm still like totally... Because again, I never go into these things with like debates. I always go in with that idea of like always trying to understand like another person's perspective. And it's like kind of dawned on me like, wow, I say gender affirming care, but to you, that's not what it is. It's actually like
the opposite.
It's the opposite. And that must be really triggering. It's like, so I was just like reviewing like, wow, how many times have I said that to someone who may have, so I'm just kind of like reflecting on my own actions.
That's okay.
But anyway, thank you for, first of all, putting that into my mind. Again, not saying I agree. I still adamantly disagree.
But you see when,
I'm like, oh, okay. That's why people get upset with me sometimes when I say that. Thank you for kind of, okay, got it. So it's not the biggest industry. Okay. 2 schools of thought here, right? One, I am the type that I trust the professionals, right? I do trust the professionals because I'm humble and I know that when it comes to education and it comes to language processing disorders, I have dedicated my life to it. And then I go to other people that have dedicated their life to their thing and I ask for their opinion on it, right? And the endocrinologists, like you said, the psychologists and the pediatric care are saying this is a good idea, right? With that said, I also come from an African-American background. I'm well aware of what medical fields can do and say is good for a general population that ends up being completely perverted, right? So I respect your viewpoint, and then I also come in with my viewpoint. I don't see gender affirming care as a huge money-making industry if you actually look at the numbers. I mean, like, it's not that big. I feel like it's conflated, right? You know what I mean? Like I know it's crazy, like after we're talking about this for so long in such a brilliant way, there's not that many, right? Like there's not that many kids that are getting top surgery, right? There's not.
But more than ever, for sure.
More than ever, for sure. There's also more people than ever on planet Earth for sure right now. So I would assume, right? But like, there's just not that many kids. There's not that many kids on hormone blockers. There's also precautions put into play. You can't be on them for more than 2 years because like you said, right? You need puberty for that kind of cognitive and psychological development. There are boundaries that we as an industry in education, endocrinology, pediatrics have put into play because we know the science. And I got to tell you, from my background, the science background that I have, it makes sense to me. From the statistical, like I was a gov major, so I'm big on statistics, as you can see. It makes sense to me. But I'm also not going to stand in front of you and be like, you have absolutely nothing to stand on. Because I know I've seen with Black communities the statistics be forged. I've seen that.
And you mentioned earlier that homosexuality used to be seen, and those were the experts. 1,000%. The experts also used to say, well, if you're schizophrenic or something like that, then you should have a lobotomy.
Right.
The experts also used to say that we should put women to sleep and pull their babies out of them.
Oh my gosh, what they used to do to women who were in labor, it's insane.
That's crazy. So I think
that
I agree. You do, see, I'm not saying you agree, but you see the perspective experts can be bought and paid for.
Yes.
They can be corrupted. Even if it's not the most lucrative part of big medicine, for the people in it,
right?
Like it's really lucrative for them,
right.
And especially if it's a small field, because then you only have a few specialists that are making a ton of money.
Fair.
And you also have the ideology pushing them. Like you mentioned, going into schools and teachers are scared to misgender their student.
Right.
Well, the doctors are too. The endocrinologists are. The psychologists are. Because they're being told either by this person, their parents, their bosses, the other people around them, insurance companies, you have to code it as this. Or, I've talked to some people who transitioned who were actually given pushback by their psychiatrist, and it made them so mad. They were like, how dare you bring up my mom? How dare you bring up my anorexia? And then what did the psychiatrist do? Fine. You want to go on hormones? No skin off my back.
Right. I got that.
So I think that's part of it.
I do understand that perspective. Now, with that said, right, to answer your question, is there a medical consensus right now that gender affirming care is psychologically beneficial? Yes. Your perspective is still valid, but there is a medical consensus for it right now. And the studies show that it's beneficial, right? I'm not saying there's no downside. I'm not saying there's no way to dissent. I'm not saying that there's not a perspective. I'm not saying that there isn't corruption going on. I don't think there is, but I value your opinion that you think that there is something nefarious going on. I say look into it. Right? I don't want to just blindly follow professionals. That sounds like a horrible idea. When the best interest is actually the children, and it's not an allegiance to a group or a policy or a political thing, you want what's best for the kids, right? So definitely I want this looked into. I want the long-term effects of, puberty blockers also looked into. But so far it seems like it's fine.
I don't think it's fine. I mean, in the UK, they stopped doing it.
Completely.
And for let's exercise caution when there's lack of data. Putting a kid on puberty blockers and saying, well, I don't know if you're going to be infertile one day. That's not good enough. I'm sure that doesn't feel good enough for you either. That's really serious. It's not just okay, your hairline might be different or there's something minor. You might be a little bit shorter. It's for girls who go on testosterone, your voice will never be the same. Your voice box will never shrink. You don't even sound, unfortunately, they don't even sound like men or women. They sound like something in between. It just breaks my heart.
Oh gosh. So first of all, I so understand your point. I so appreciate actually meeting people like you because, I feel like sometimes a lot of the people that have, again, I mean, we're getting along, but you can see we're completely on the different sides of this, right? But that idea of I feel like it's so quick in the comment section that you don't realize that the other person also is for the good of humanity, right? I feel like that's so forgotten. And I feel like if we actually took the time to talk to each other, we would remember oh, we're both on, no one is team force kids into gender roles and no one is on team every kid should be trans. I hope those people don't exist, right? But, is there something to be said for, just hard data that supports okay, you know what? No. I take that back because we've discussed this already. What about listening to the general population, right? The kids themselves, right? What about them? Hey, I feel this and I think this would help.
Okay, I want you to answer, then I have a question specifically for you.
Absolutely.
I don't think kids in general, especially on a subject like this with so much riding on these decisions that they cannot comprehend, are sufficient authorities when it comes to this. Are you an authority on what shirt you want to wear that day? Are you an authority on whether you want to play soccer or tennis? Are you an authority on whether you want broccoli or green beans? Or you want whatever, you know what I mean. Yeah, you're an authority on that. Are you an authority at 13 years old? I mean, do you remember being 13?
Oh, I remember.
I was just going to say that. I look back at the things that I thought. I'm like, oh, wow, I had literally no idea.
When I was 20.
Stupid in some ways. I mean, smart in your own 13-year-old way, but also looking back, you're like, oh my gosh, you were so dumb. Everyone thinks that they're going to marry the guy that they were dating when you're 14. And you're like, oh my gosh.
Although I did marry the guy I started dating when I was 15.
Okay, so you're smart. I'm so glad I didn't. See, there you go. Things change. And if someone told you hey, you got to marry that girl right now. That's, I don't know. I don't think so. Because if a bunch of kids said, well, I want euthanasia, I want to kill myself because I feel sad. Do I think that 13-year-old is an authority on whether or not they should live or die? No, I do not, because they can't understand.
I love supporting Anima Mundi Herbals, which is my favorite apothecary that carries organic, wild-crafted, and ethically grown botanicals, from elderberry syrup and adaptogenic mushrooms to spirulina, chocolate protein, teas, and collagen booster powders. They are a super special company that uses fair trade practices, beyond organic farming, education, and small farmers to create remedies that benefit people from all walks of life. Lately, I've been obsessed with their chocolate protein superfood powder that I add to my morning smoothies after a workout. It's formulated with pea protein, rice protein, and pumpkin seed protein and tastes amazing. It's adaptogenic, energizing, and nutrient dense. You guys have to try this yummy plant protein powder, and they also have so many other different remedies on their site which are formulated for beauty, immunity, mood elevation, stress relief, sleep, etc. And I find them to be the perfect addition in my healthy daily routine for my body inside and out. So use my code EllenFisher20 for 20% off. Just click the link in my show notes to get this deal. So my next question to you, Desmond, is do you believe that kids are born trans or born non-binary, or is this something that is socially formed and nurtured?
Why would you ever ask me that question?
It's really important.
And I 100% have
already talked about it.
Well, I did, right? Because but it's an answer no one wants to hear, right? Unfortunately. And it's because it doesn't align with either side. In my opinion, doesn't align with either side, right? Because you are always, if you look scientifically, you are predetermined for certain characteristics. Even kind of homosexuality, we have 6 biomarkers that kind of have a kind of prediction for homosexuality. But just like all other genetic predisposed factors, your environment plays a role in it, right? Like the question is, are your environmental factors going to be turned on based on what you do, right? You can get a DNA test right now, right? And it can say you are biologically more at risk in your DNA for this, and that disease, right? Or this, that, and the other condition, or positive ones. I have the biomarker for being an athlete, right? But the question is your environment going to promote that biomarker? The more important question is, can you control the environment, right? So are you born trans? You're certainly born with a predisposition for it, just like homosexuality. Sorry, like sometimes I go to say something and I don't know if it's crossing a line, but I'll say, like, I will say this.
Don't worry about that.
So,
Just
okay,
say
I
what you
appreciate it.
want.
But like, so for example, my mom had thyroid issues, right? There's pretty significant studies that link thyroid issues in prenatal care to homosexualities in men for their sons, right? There's a pretty clear correlation there, especially how the thyroid affects the hormone levels. My mom had a hyperthyroid and Graves' disease, and I know another kid who 1,000% hyper. Oh God, I'll look into it. Well, I'll get into it. But there's some serious studies that biologically show, yep, some chemical reactions put your kid more at not risk, right? But for being queer, right? And that's fine. But then are you in an environment that turns those on, right? And I think going back to my subject before, right? That idea of, well, would I be sitting in front of you as a woman if I was in a different household, right? Because I know I would always feel this way, right? But if I was in a more restrictive household, I think I would have just gone all the way. You know what I mean? Like if I wasn't allowed to try out nail polish, try out makeup at the age of 10, get the laser hair removal, I would have been like, everything is wrong. Everything is wrong. I want the blockers. I want the estrogen. I want the boobs. I want the hair. I want it all, right? But I was given an environment that allowed me to experiment. And because of that, I'm not trans. So are you born trans? You're born with the predispositions, just like all kids are born with chemical predispositions for homosexuality, gender, all of that stuff. But you can't control the environmental factors all the time. What would you think to that?
I would be really surprised if people are genetically predisposed to thinking they're the opposite sex, except for that very rare case, what I think is probably still a very rare case of someone actually having gender dysphoria. Maybe you're one of those people who really had gender dysphoria, that persistent, insistent, consistent feeling that you were just in the wrong body. And I have so much, sympathy for that, because that would be so torturous feeling.
Yeah.
That would be so awful. I still don't agree with changing someone's body to align with that terrible feeling, but I can understand how terrible of a feeling that would be. So that Perhaps. Maybe that's something that they are born with. Maybe environmental factors still play into that. It does seem like there is some kind of correlation between, and I'm not saying you, but some kind of early childhood trauma and then feeling uncomfortable with one's biological gender. And so I really think it's more environmental. I think it's different though for men and for women. Every woman that I've talked to who once identified as a man had some kind of negative experience because she was a female. So she was molested, she was harassed, something. I'm not saying all, but those that I've talked to, and they felt as a teenager going through puberty, oh my gosh, my boobs are the problem. My female body is the problem. My femininity is what attracted that man to do that to me. And so I'm going to reject that and I want to feel safe. And so I want to cut off my whatever. And then for men, I think sometimes what I've seen, and again, I'm not saying you and I'm not saying everyone, but it does seem that there is a confusion in men who identify as women, sometimes with like their identity or stated identity and their sexual attractions, because we also find that about 85% of the time, maybe even more than that, but that's what the latest study shows, that when a boy who thinks that he's the opposite sex, by the time puberty resolves, he no longer thinks that. He might just think that he's attracted to men at that point. So I do think that there are different factors going on. I don't buy into most people confused about their gender having some kind of genetic predisposition.
Right. And that's, yeah.
No, if you had something to say,
well, I was
go
going to
ahead.
say, I think that's a good point, right? Because I think this is where the studies get confused. Now, I got to say this, like, so everyone hears it. Like, I feel that people are determined, you know, from birth, your set of personality traits, how you identify and what body is going to be right for you and how you feel about that is more of a born thing, right? But with that said, and I want to state that, like, so like, you know, like that whole idea of like, you know, born this way and proud, I want to support that before I go into kind of agreeing with you a little bit. But I want to firmly say, if people say something like I was born trans, I do support that notion, right? With that said, though, right, this needs to be looked into because we have the studies that say this was 2018 and I'm not a conspiracy person, by the way. I almost like the studies before 2021, before the whole thing was more in this.
Became political.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I almost like those studies more, right? Off the record with all the cameras around. But I almost like those studies more because before it was politicized, then I felt like I had the clear data. And the clear data in 2018, 2019 was kids had a firm idea of what their gender was and their gender performance from ages 3 to 5. Right. And those kids, the kids that did not assign the 3 to 5, right. And that small population of kids that did not kind of identify with the body that they were given, those kids were given hormone intervention maybe later or any type of gender affirming care. And they had 90% absolutely no depression and they did really well. Right. Then 3 years happened. And all of a sudden, like I was talking to you about, the statistics got really jumbled all of a sudden. All of a sudden we have, like you said, significantly more female assigned at birth individuals now saying that they're trans. It used to happen a lot earlier. And I'm not saying anyone's lying about it. I'm just saying that we really need to explore what's going on. And of course, what's most important, how to address it. Because definitely, in my opinion, saying, well, no, this is a phase and it's, you know, you just need to like, and you would never see, but do you see how I like all of a sudden make the other side into the bad guy, right? Like, you know what I mean?
I
Like
don't
everyone,
think you do that.
Okay, but like I do it unintentionally sometimes. And so like the other side is like, well, if you like how more like you described it, like, hey, listen, we need to talk about this. I don't think we're going to transition you. This isn't the best idea. You know, we're going to have you come to terms. Did something happen in your childhood? That's really invalidating to some people, right? Some people really are just trans, right? Or really are just non-binary. Or if we take out all of the expectations, just are what I am.
Okay, let me be like super sorry.
Yeah.
Well, this question actually goes right into what he's saying.
Okay.
So if I could just say,
Sure.
Many speak of the significant mental health challenges and high rates of suicide among transgender youth. So how can society ensure that these individuals feel supported and understood, even within frameworks that you might feel more acceptable? So I feel like that's kind of what you're asking.
Exactly what I'm asking.
Yeah. I think it's important to say, and I know I'm just going to drop this and it's going to sound really scandalous, but I do not believe in transgenderism. Like, I don't believe that you can transition. I don't believe that's possible. I think that you can change your body. You can try to change your hormonal makeup, but that doesn't change your gender. Again, defining our terms, I believe that gender and sex are one and the same. And so you can't change your gender. So that's why I always see transition as harmful, because you are manifesting a lie and trying to turn someone into something that they're not. Even someone like Jazz Jennings and all of the health problems that, like, I would say he has because of this, like, oh my goodness, I wish that those people would have had early intervention. And it does go with what you're talking about, is that I wish that the model of care was from the beginning, and maybe we can agree on this somewhat. We would probably disagree on maybe like the end result, but maybe we'd agree on where we start. A kid who walks in and says, I'm 13 years old. I think that I'm a male, female. I'm born in the wrong body. I want to go on hormones. Maybe we could agree with that professional saying, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Wait.
That's the last thing we're going to talk about. And then the first thing we're going to talk about, what's going on at home? What other comorbidities do you have? Like, what other diagnoses? Because so often these kids, they have depression, they have anxiety, they have some trauma, they have eating disorders. And so many detransitioners that I've talked to, they say, they didn't even ask me about that. They weren't even interested in hearing about my eating disorder. They weren't even interested that I had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and that I was just put on medications for those things. They weren't interested in the fact that my uncle had like molested me. And so, because all of those things can't code for insurance, and so these professionals can't get reimbursed for those kinds of conversations, unfortunately. But if that were the model of care, even though I don't agree ever with transitioning, but maybe we could come to terms with that should always be last.
Always.
Let's first work on the mind. Let's first work on the environmental factors. Let's first work on the heart. Let's address these things. Maybe you think that running away from your gender is going to fix your problems.
Less about that part, but everything else you said.
And they're not.
Right.
And they're not. But that's true. We would agree on that. Transition is not going to fix all your other problems.
You always want the irreversible thing done last. Right? As a scientist, as an educator, as parents, right? You always want the irreversible thing done last, which for me, like, hormone blockers are fairly reversible, in my opinion. The studies have said, but those deserve to be looked into. But I agree. There shouldn't be an immediate go on this, go on that, go on the other, because it is a problem, right? That's a huge issue. But then what do we do? Right? Because these kids exist. I was one of the kids. I know these kids, and these kids watch these things, right? And I can't say that they're not trans, because actually the ones that I know really are, right? Or like the young adults that they really are, or they really are non-binary. I get that I don't think there's a social contagion. I do think it trended in some areas, right? This is a horrible joke I'm about to make. Horrible. So get ready for this. But like, I have this joke with my like friends where we go like, oh, do you remember like the Visco girls? Like, they had the hydro flasks, right? So we have this like inside gay joke where we go like, well, the Visco girls started out as Visco girls, then COVID happened and they turned into the she/they lesbians.
Oh, Visco, VSCO. Is that how you say that?
So
okay.
like basically the hydro flask started, then they turned into the she/they lesbians during the pandemic, and then they became the Stanley Cup girls. Oh like, it was just like,
I don't know anything about that.
No, me neither.
But I do have a question then for you. What are your thoughts on someone? I saw a detransitioner once explain their story, how they wished that a therapist would have just, or that anyone in their life, like their parents, their friends, would have just said that you're wonderfully made just the way that you are. Right. She said that she was crying and saying, no one ever said that to me. Right. I felt like I was in the wrong body. Right. I felt like I needed to transition, that would, like you said, solve my problems. And no one just said I was wonderful just the way I is, and there's nothing I needed to change.
Well, I think, first of all, that's awful. And I'm so sorry that happened to her. I think that happened. I'm so sorry that happened to her. And I think that's 100% valid. And I also am, in my opinion, and this is like my own conspiracy, right? I'm so sad that this is the focus, right? Like that's what gets like the media attention, and not Like, it's so bizarre to me. Like, as someone who is very into the data, right? Like, that's not the average, right? And I respect your opinion. But the person that was assaulted as a child and then says that they're a man it's not the average. It's not even close to the average, because we have the studies to back it up.
We have the studies that show that people who are transgender or mostly don't have a history of being assaulted or harassed. I haven't seen that study either way.
Right.
And I'm not saying that the studies show that they are. I'm speaking anecdotally, but it sounds like you're saying objectively that's a minority. Do we know that objectively?
Well, okay, that's a great question, right? But objectively, we know that if a psychologist says, oh, you're feeling a certain type of way, and it was because of an assault, right? The psychologist is then going to diagnose PTSD and not gender dysphoria, right? So we know based on the assuming they are valid, right? Maybe I have a little bit more trust in psychologists, which is fair. But assuming that the data is aligned, I don't see the PTSD diagnosis as being comorbid with gender dysphoria. I don't see that, right? That's not, those things are not correlated. I see trans individuals highly correlated with anxiety, and then we attribute that to social interactions that they come into contact with. And I see it highly correlated to depressive episodes, which is, again, social transitioning, right? Social transitioning and being accepted holistically as a trans individual, the gender that they feel that they are. Highly comorbid with depression and anxiety, not comorbid with the PTSD diagnosis. It just doesn't happen. So we have the data on that, right? So, sorry, and what was the actual question? Okay, got it. Right. And that idea of like, well, what about this one person? It's like, again, right. And this is like me being like, oh my God, I'm so sick of it. Like if I hear one more, like just in, and you know, and at this unnamed workout institution, there was a man in the, you know, women's locker room. It's like, that is not the average experience. It is not the average experience. And I'm like so sick of, and I'm not sick of it because that actually sounds somewhat unprofessional, right? But like, I guess it really hurts my heart that so frequently the trans and gay community and men in general, like are so frequently made into like the predatory people that are coming after the children and causing all of this nefarious stuff when the statistics do not back that up. Like,
well, I guess my question was more like, do you think that what she wished somebody, that people had said to her, do you think that's something that should be part of that beginning?
Oh, but first of all, yes, but it is, right? Like, do you know what I mean by that, right? Like that idea of, if you look like statistically, right? You can look at the DSM-5, look at the questions that are required, look at gender affirming care, even things like positive behavioral intervention training. When it comes to like addressing things like gender, you check to see if other things are going on. Like it's in the diagnostic code book, right? That you need to do these things. But I'm saying like, and it's not you, right? You didn't do anything wrong, but that's the story that we hear. We hear like that, the 3 detransitioners that happened where they were never asked if anything else was wrong. And you don't hear the 98% that they were, and it worked.
I'm saying that I don't think that we know that it's 98%. And I'm not saying
that
it's
completely made up statistic.
No, I know. But I'm saying that I don't think that we know. Right. And I think that the stories that are coming out of the UK and the US where we do hear that, like they never checked about my comorbidities. No one ever told me, hey, actually, it's not possible to be born in the wrong body. That's just like a nonsensical statement. And I want to affirm that like, it's good to be a boy and it's okay that you like ballet. It's good to be a girl. It's okay that you like snakes. I don't think that that is what is happening. In fact, we see in libraries, we see in schools that they're now reading books like I Am Jazz and introducing these concepts to young kids who maybe previously weren't confused. But like, I mean, you've worked with kids. We have kids. We know how formative those years are, how malleable their minds are, how open to suggestion kids are. That you could say to a child, like, because they trust you, you're their mom, they believe anything that you have to say. And the same thing for a teacher in those formative years. Like, if you say to them, you can totally become a tree, you can. They will believe that. They will start acting like that. And so whoever suggests something first tends to have the authority on that thing. And so I don't think that that is what is happening. And I don't know the statistics, but we are seeing more and more that in those formative years, kindergarten, first grade, introducing this concept of gender confusion to kids who are just trying to figure out like what the world is. I think that is so insanely harmful and evil and wrong and cruel. And it's just, so I don't believe that there is in the mainstream any kind of like hesitant approach to these kids. I think it's, oh, you think that you're that? All right, they, them it is.
Right. And so, okay, I have two things, right? So, but I definitely want to address that idea of like this whole, is it being pushed in schools type deal, right? And I want to say, like you were saying, like there's these books that are being read and this, that, and the other. And, you know, like I said, I do social media, like I do TikTok, and I got a question, like, you know, my son is 3. Is he like, he's having trouble understanding they, them pronouns, right? And I was like, okay, let's break this down, right? Is that, and this is me taking kind of non-binary out of it, taking my personal identity out of it. You do need to establish the average before you establish the exception. Right? Otherwise, it is confusing. Now, I don't think my existence is confusing or scary. I don't think trans existence is confusing or scary, right? I don't think we need to get rid of gay teachers. We don't need to get rid of trans teachers. We don't need to get rid of all trans books. But I'm saying, if you do force things in a classroom at a very young age, then it is a little bit confusing, right? And it also makes the rest of us look bad, which is why I have such a controversial opinion in this, right? Like, oh, do I need to teach kids about what being non-binary is at the age of 5? Absolutely the heck not. Why would you need to do that, right? It's, oh, who is that? That's Desmond. What's his name? Desmond. What's his pronouns? He, him. But I have one kid always says she, her, because he thinks I'm a girl. Whatever. I've worked with him for a year now. And he thinks I'm a girl. And I'm like, because he goes, girls wear makeup. And I go, okay. And he goes, it's a girl. I go, fine. Doesn't matter, right? Whatever lets the kid kind of understand the universe properly. But my issue is then I feel you get this group of people that are actually trying to be supportive of me, right? And supportive of our community. And they push it hard. And they push the like, it's okay to be gay. It's okay to be non-binary. What is your sexuality? What are your pronouns really early? And then people don't even want to be around me. Right. And that's hard. Right. Like I was on another kind of debate, and it's that idea of like, I had 24 kids my first year of teaching. Day 2, I had 19 because people just switched out. I don't teach kids what it's like to be gay. One of my students came in the other day, right? They go, Desmond, do you know what non-binary is? And I'm like, what? Because I don't tell my kids, right? This student was 10, right? And you'd be shocked about how many students have no idea, because my own personal identity has absolutely nothing to do with my educational intervention. So why would I talk about my own gender or sexuality with my students? That's completely irrelevant, right? So my student comes in and goes, do you know what non-binary is? And I go, tell me. And they go, well, my teacher is non-binary and she goes by they. And I'm like, really? That's super interesting. And it just dawned on me where it's like they'll figure it out on their own, or it doesn't even matter to them. Kids are inherently not judgmental people, right? In my opinion, right? So like, I don't think it needs to be forced. I also don't think it needs to be hidden. And I think that's maybe where we'll be, right? We don't need to hide trans educators. We don't need to hide they, them pronouns. We also don't need to do like readings being like, this is how you transition to a 6-year-old, unless they're asking about it, right? And that's where I stand on that subject.
Right. Go ahead and reply.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to even think this might be the first time that I don't necessarily have a response. I totally understand your perspective. And of course, I would not present to my child ever the idea of transitioning as like a valid option or like something that just exists out there in the world that is good or something that should be like put on display or glamorized in any way. Of course, at the right time, you can talk to kids about the existence of these things, but kind of like what I was saying earlier about the power of first suggestion, I think that, and we probably agree on this, that parents should be the first people and really the only people to be talking to their kids about these things, especially at a young age. And it should be up to the parents to say, okay, this is what we believe. This is the reality. Now, I personally really disagree with that parent who is trying to teach their 3-year-old they, them pronouns. It just breaks my heart because 3-year-olds are still trying to talk. Like they can't even say their R's.
Right.
And you're trying to teach them the difference between like plural and singular. Yeah. Developmentally, they're not even there yet. Right. And so, but because of this ideology, and you're probably right, like she probably fancies herself like a super strong ally and she's trying to do it, but like at the expense of kids really do see things, I've realized just as a mom, in binaries very often. They really want to put people and things in categories. Yes,
so important.
It's normal, and it helps them feel safe because
1000%.
everything is new to them.
1000%.
And so they're like, okay, mommies, daddies, aunts, uncles, male,
super
female,
important.
baby, grown up. Like all of that is really important to a kid. And I think pushing kids into this confusing, nebulous, liminal space and we expect them to understand all this gray and all these nuances and all this stuff when they're 5,
right?
And they're like barely even understand the alphabet yet,
right?
I think that that's super sad, and I think it's really damaging, actually.
Well, it can be really damaging, right? And then again, it's always important because I just like, I want to like kind of prompt up that you're right, that kids differentiate this, that, the other, right? Like this is in, this is out, that they chunk the information, right? Even adults, we do this with like phone numbers, right? If I said like, what's the 5th number in your phone number, you wouldn't know, but you would know the first 3, the next 3, and then the next 4. That's just how we chunk information as human beings. Kids need to chunk male and female at first. I think that's important. But I don't think it's a problem to then later expose a kid, right? And then I guess, and here's a question, right, that I have to you, and it's not going to be, I'm not like, this is going to sound almost like facetious, but like to me, I always get very confused because I will be on live talking about the importance of dyslexic intervention, right? And someone will be like, you're indoctrinating children. And I'm like, okay, in all fairness, you're the ones that are saying only parents should expose things to their kids. And I think this way, and I only want you to think this way. This is not an accusation towards you or any parent. If anyone's indoctrinating kids, it's actually you guys. And I'm not even saying indoctrination has to be bad, right? We should indoctrinate kids into not killing people. We should indoctrinate kids into kindness and into being one with the world, right? Like indoctrination doesn't always have to be this like negative thing, but I'm always so shocked that I always get this like, you're dangerous when you're around children, you're a danger to them and you're indoctrinating them. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. In my opinion.
Well, like people are assuming that you're doing it. They're lumping in a category that everybody who is in your community are doing
this. When I don't see myself doing that. I don't see a lot of the actual community, not like the super intense people you see on social media, but I don't see a lot of actual community members doing this. I don't see it.
And do you believe that there should be LGBT conversation in sex ed, like in elementary school or high school at all?
Well, that's a really great question, right? Can I respond like with a question?
Yeah.
Is like, well, what conversations are happening in general, right? Because it's like that idea of like, well, should you teach kids what being gay is? Like, well, are you talking about marriage?
Like she stated, this should be something at home that the parents speak to the kids about. And so I'm guessing you're going to say not in school at all, especially LGBT conversation.
Yeah,
in high school.
Yeah, I don't think so. It's not, again, that like, okay, if a kid brings it up or it's like a topic of conversation that the teacher should be like, nope, shutting it down. Do not talk about that.
Right.
But should it be a part of the curriculum? No. And I actually think the statistics like larger sex ed, I actually think is kind of counterproductive in a lot of ways. And so I just don't think it's the role of the school to be talking about these things. I do think that it is the role of parents. And I know there's conversations about what about the parents who are like, abusive or intimidating the kid who like came out as gay. And of course those are conversations, but teachers, as you well know, are mandatory reporters. And so if there were really abuse happening, whether or not a school is teaching sex ed, like a teacher like you is going to report that. And so I'm responding to an argument that you're not even making, but that I see out there. I just don't think there's really any justification for a school taking that authoritative role, introducing kids to something that quite frankly has to do with their genitalia and has to do with sexuality. Like, at the end of the day, the teachers are not going to be helping bear the consequence of whatever choice that kid makes, whether it's transition or whatever. And it's that parent that woke up in the middle of the night with that child when they were 3 and alone and scared. That teacher, you love your kids, but of course, it's not the same as a parent. Let the person who knows that child best, has the best interest of their child at heart be the one to talk to them about these really sensitive topics.
And what do you think?
Well, I think you brought up a really, great point there. Do you think that there's some confirmation bias though, right? Like that idea of if you think this way, like, just like that idea of, okay, but what if the really, and again, I don't like using conservative because then it looks at it as like a negative, right? But like what people think of as conservative, right? The super conservative family who has a gay kid, right? Like we know the studies, we know that's a really high risk for suicide. We know that if they have somebody that they trust, one adult that the kid trusts, we know that if an LGBTQIA kid has one adult they trust, the risk of suicide and depression plummets.
But does that mean that there needs to be curriculum in schools talking about transition?
What curriculum, right? And I think that, first of all, great question, right? Because like what curriculum? Because I feel that sometimes I get in trouble for like being like, oh yeah, I address someone as like they, them, right? And that's fine, right? Or I say like, oh, she, her, or them can like, and people are like, well, why'd you say them? That's overly inclusive. And I'm like, I'm just trying. Okay. But then I see other things that are like completely ridiculous. Like again, this is why I get yelled at both sides. Like, have you seen some LGBTQIA sex education? Some of it's great. Some of it's terrible. Like
some of it's super graphic.
Some of it's literally, I kid you not, again, because I will always try to like stick with the facts on this. Have you seen the studies about like LGBTQIA inclusive sex ed? It's the studies show that kids that are LGBTQIA and are introduced to LGBTQIA sex ed may benefit from it. That like, what type of conclusions? What kind of conclusion is that? That's right. Not worth changing the curriculum for. No, I do think that we should always be inclusive with our curriculum. We shouldn't hide gay individuals, right? We shouldn't hide trans individuals. We shouldn't say I remember when I was a kid, I had two moms, right? And my mom would like have a girlfriend and people would be like, that's inappropriate. You can't talk about that. And I'm like, but they're married and that kid talks about how those parents are married. Why can't I talk about my mom's girlfriend? People couldn't get married at the time, two women, right? When I was in the first grade. It's like, well, that's inappropriate at school. It's like, well, why is my family situation inappropriate and yours isn't? That seems wrong. So that I think should be introduced. I think you should know that a woman could marry a woman and a man could marry a man. And sure, this is what we'll disagree. Someone can identify as they, them, or prefer being called they, them. But you don't need to talk about it, like, creating an incision in the penis and turning it inside out to create a vagina. Like, that's just not necessary. Was I allowed to say that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really think or like see a need for a teacher being like, here are the different types of families, two men, two women. I would definitely not want a teacher to be introducing that. Again, that's like a parent conversation. And I think like the overemphasis on representation, that every single person has to be represented in every single book or every single like textbook, I think that's just like really overwrought and can actually be harmful to a certain degree.
Want to know something? I agree with you. I think it's a cop-out. I think I 1,000% agree with you. I think that is such a, I am so happy you brought that up because I can go on a rant about this. Being like, just because you made a gay character in this novel and named him Tyrone doesn't mean you're an ally and not racist anymore. That's actually not enough. I would actually prefer you to be a real ally than simply putting ethnic names and gay characters into things. Like that actually, I agree with you. It is actually harmful to emphasize the importance of everyone being seen in every situation all the time instead of actual support. I 1,000% agree.
Okay, so I have one more question for you and one more question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. For you, in the context of freedom and belief and expression, how do you reconcile the rights of individuals, including children, to express their identity in regards to the freedom aspect? It's kind of my last main question.
Yes. Obviously, children and adults have different things that they are allowed to do because they are different. Children are not just little people. They're not just little adults. Their bodies are different. Their minds are different. Their needs are different. And obviously, we see them as mentally and physically weaker than adults. And that's why they need parents. That's why they need teachers. That's why they need protection. That's why they are afforded different rights and even more protection in some ways under the law than adults are. And in some ways, kids have to be protected from themselves. Anyone who has been around toddlers understands that. And that's why, that's why we need parents. Kids can't just be left alone by themselves. And of course, that's true on the micro level, and it's true on the macro level too. And so the freedom of expression, especially when it comes to children, has to have limits. And one of those limits has to be what is going to harm their bodies, what's going to harm their minds. And of course, I think the idea that you can become the opposite sex is harmful, but it is also primarily, it is simply untrue. And I'm not going to lie to my child. I actually take that to the degree that I don't even tell my child that Santa is real. And so that's where I am on that, is that I think lying to your children, especially about something so fundamental, is wrong. And it also breaks my heart, because I want my children to know, like, your body is good. It was created with purpose and intention, and it is awesome to be a girl. It is awesome to be a boy. I know it's uncomfortable and it's weird and you don't like this aspect. Welcome to the club. Everyone has something that they don't like about themselves. And look, we're not going to be changing your body to try to fix, those kinds of insecurities, or because you think you're the opposite sex, because that's not what God made you. So that's the kind of affirmation that I want to see. And I think any kind of expression, while some of it can be good and we want our kids to be creative and live out their strengths, absolutely, there has to be limitations, and adults are responsible for setting those parameters.
Okay. Do you want to respond to that, or should I ask you about that question?
I think what you said makes a lot of sense, right? I think there's some questions within, that I have. Like, for example, when can somebody start playing with makeup? And are those ages different when it comes to one being a boy and one being a girl? Right? Just like that idea, right? Like, cause I think cause you said everything, and everything you said sounded like really good. And I don't necessarily know if I disagree with any of it, right? But then the same people that say these things, right? Cause now, as you see, now I'm like chunking you. It's like, I've heard this before. And these are the same people that say boys can't have makeup at the age of 8.
Yeah, which goes back to my question about
social constructs.
I would love to hear your answer on that.
I'm like, what's step 2? Because everything you said to me was completely fine until all of a sudden I hear that idea of like, well, boys can't wear makeup at 8. It's like, why the heck not? Like,
yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Okay. So because social constructs are not always based on some kind of specific biological reality, I do acknowledge that they can be fluid. They can be relative based on the culture. But in most societies that we've seen, there have been some sort of gender markers and gender distinctions. This idea that everyone is the same, which you haven't said, is just not something that we see, because our biological capacities as male and female, namely the difference in being able to bear children, is really what has kind of distinguished male and female. And how we dress, the roles we fulfill, has generally throughout history kind of honored those distinctions. And I think that's still true today. How we decide which distinctions, or how we express those distinctions, which ones we have to abide by and which ones we don't. I also acknowledge that that is like a conversation to be had, but do I believe that men or boys should be wearing dresses or putting on makeup? No, I do not.
Well, I'm curious about that, right? Because that idea of like everything, at first you said, right? That idea of like, have kids love their body, make sure that we have self-love, make sure because right, like talk about like protecting kids' safety. Number one, you can give things against kids, like being in any way, shape or form targeted by somebody that is wrong. Self-confidence and knowing your body is yours, right? So 1,000%, right? But that idea of like, okay, so everything you said was right, but then I get a little bit confused. Like, okay, so what's wrong with a little bit of eyeshadow, right? What's wrong? Like, okay, where are the eye? And I get that. And I really appreciate how you acknowledged that societally, it's almost a little bit random, right? I think you put that very eloquently.
I wouldn't say random. Right. I would say just because something is a social construct doesn't mean that it's not grounded in reality.
Something in biology.
Now, some things, maybe. Some things are arbitrary. Right. But I would say some things aren't. And I don't know that we have to be able to perfectly articulate the like correlation in order to say that. Like language is a social construct. Okay. Pants are like clothing is a social construct. Just the existence of us having to wear clothes. There are a lot of things that are social constructs that we acknowledge, okay, that distinction, that thing that we have adopted as a culture, as a society, as humanity is good. It's based on some kind of biological need or some kind of psychological need for distinction. So that's how I see the differences between like what we wear. That's how I see the differences between like makeup, is that those distinctions are actually important between male and female. And while there may be some nuance, we have to decide on some kind of limitations. And I'm not saying everyone in America is going to agree on what those look like all the time.
All the time, right? And but let's take your point, right? That idea of like, well, just because it's a societal norm doesn't mean there's not a biological base. Let's do makeup, right?
1000%. Yeah, men used to wear makeup.
Well, men used to men totally used to wear makeup, right? Like, you know, in ancient Egyptian times, right? We got like the sun, it's bearing down on the eyes. You got the black eye makeup under. What's the problem with a girl doing it? It's the same thing, right? But then, you know, historically, we've seen tons of men wear dresses. Historically, we've seen tons of men wear makeup. Like historically, only the idea of men not wearing makeup is actually very new, right? Because we even have like presidents wearing wigs and makeup, right? And things like that. But you know what? Like to avoid that conversation, I'll even bite. Okay, let's talk about a very specific part of Europe, the Eurocentric idea of makeup and the Eurocentrism of makeup. We got women on average biologically larger eyes. In the lips, we like to see good circulation. That means that, you know, circulatory system is working well. We start rouging the lips a little bit to make it look like you have better circulation. Throw a little bit of mascara and eyeshadow, the eyes look bigger. Boom, you look healthier. That's why makeup makes women look more attractive to men on average, right? The biological foundation for the social norm of women wearing their makeup in a specific way in America. Why can't a 12-year-old boy do it? Neither a 12-year-old boy or a 12-year-old girl should be attracting anyone. They're just playing.
Are you literally asking?
Yeah, like I'm literally asking, like, what's the problem? No, they're not. Neither of them are attracting anyone, right? Girls do the makeup, like you said, biological necessity that has led to a social norm. Women tend to be attracted to men on average. Gays, 20% of the population or less, right? It's gone up a little bit. On average, women tend to attract men. Women attract men by having bigger eyes, good circulation, you know, high cheekbones, right? We throw on the highlight, right? You guys throw on the highlight, the nice lip circulation, the bigger eyes. You guys feminize your traits, right?
I think that you probably acknowledge that there is something feminine, at least today, about wearing makeup and painting your nails, because you have talked about considering yourself non-binary, and not just because of the things inside you, but also how you manifest that.
1000%.
And so I think that you are acknowledging that that gender manifestation or the identification manifestation is more feminine. And so we're kind of agreeing that wearing makeup, at least as it is today, and look, all human beings are a product somewhat of their context. And so I don't live in ancient Rome. I don't live in Africa 500 years ago. And culture does change, society does change, and the distinctions or how those distinctions show up between men and women, they do change, but they still exist and they're still important. Right. And so, yes, it's true that most men today aren't wearing like powder and wigs the way that our founding fathers did. And then that was masculine. Today, that's not masculine. What I'm concerned about is that today it's not masculine. And I want my boy, even though I don't think that he has to like fulfill every single stereotype.
I get nervous, right?
Every single stereotype. There are still some distinctions that I want to make sure that like we are solid on, and that would be one of them. So no, I wouldn't. I mean, I also, by the way, wouldn't let my 8-year-old like daughter wear makeup. I think it's just too early. But yeah, I'm not going for that with my son.
So first of all, I completely respect it, and it's your kid. And I just wanted to like also preface this idea of, since this is such a hot topic issue, whenever a student comes up to me, because I have the full face of makeup on every single day, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you are so beautiful. Can I wear makeup?" Not my decision. Conversation between you and your family.
Yeah, I think is the right answer.
It is 1,000% the right answer. Not only because it's the truth, but because it avoids us again being villainized for trying to do something we're not trying to do. We're not trying to take over the world. But I think that idea of like, it's so interesting to me because, you know, I get like, I'm so for this like world, right? Where like the boy could wear a dress, the boy could paint his nails. Who the heck cares, right? We don't need labels. We don't need to question if they're they, them. Just let everyone do their thing. And then if titles or labels work better in the future, that's fine. But then I get worried because it's like, oh, no. The girl can't play football or get the short haircut and the boy can't paint his nails. And I'm like, why? But you're right? That idea of like, we don't live in Rome, right? We're not in Scotland. Not everyone's wearing like a kilt, right? But if it is seen as more feminine, which it is, makeup is often seen as more feminine in certain parts of the United States, right? Is there a problem with a boy showing feminine traits?
Well, that was my last question
Yeah.
to you, is there a benefit to these masculine feminine roles that she's talking about, that we are different, and that like, is there a benefit to it being different?
Well, I think that whether or not, if there's a benefit, it's the truth, like you said, right? So whether or not it's a benefit, like,
Well, I guess because you're asking, well, why not?
But I feel
what's the harm?
You know what the issue is, right? And here's where it gets like super crazy, right? Is that I feel like that why I appreciate you is because like, I know you argue for the same thing, because I very different backgrounds, right? But like, I was raised by two moms. Women need respect. They need their struggles validated. They need their spaces. They need safe spaces. And I'm all for that. And as somebody who had two moms, right? I'm always shocked at how boys don't know anything about what it's like to be a girl at all. And it almost creates misogyny and othering and villainization of women, right? They have no idea what a period is, and it's disgusting, and women are shamed for it, and there's all of this shame that goes to it. And I'm like, oh, I have, tampons in my classroom, it's fine. Parents know. And I always tell them if one is given out, by the way, always, right? But that idea of like, if the boys and girls realize there are significant differences, there are some, but they're more similar than we think, right? So I feel like it would actually create a lessering of sexism if we showed boys and girls they are more similar than we let on, in my opinion.
Well, I do think that we are on the same page in wanting there to be less demonization of and objectification of women and of girls.
1,000%.
So that is definitely, I would say, like a shared value or a shared goal that we have. There's so much that we didn't.
I know we didn't even get to the sports thing.
We didn't go to women in sports.
I wanted to do the sports thing. Can we say my opinion really fast because it's super controversial?
It's up to you.
You're gonna disagree with it.
The timing. I mean, I feel like this was the most efficient conversation, debate, or opposed views.
20 seconds.
Yeah,
I do think that people,
if you want to go ahead,
because I know you're going to disagree, but I'm not sure if you've heard this perspective.
I'm going to respond. Okay, go.
I think that kids should be able to play in the sports league of the gender that they identify, but when it comes to professional sports, we need to make sure that there's no biological advantages, and professional sports should be considered different than kids' sports in schools.
Okay, kids' sports they're what leads to the professional sports. And so for every boy that is able to run track or swim or play tennis against a girl, that's a girl that misses out on the scholarship, misses out on the spot in college, and then misses out on the opportunity to be able to play at a professional level. And as we've already acknowledged, we know that there's such a big difference biologically between male and female. Even when you go on estrogen, once you've gone through that male puberty, you've got a bigger heart, bigger anaerobic and aerobic capacity, bigger muscle mass, greater bone density. You're generally taller, faster, stronger than a woman. And so women are not only vulnerable to being injured by these men, but also, of course, beat out when it comes to competitions. And it's unfair.
So what you're saying is like, it's hard because my idea is like, cut it off at middle school, right? Or like cut it off after high school. But you're like, well, there's things before, and that leads to the professional league.
Yeah.
Never considered that perspective. It's really, I don't have a counter argument. I'm not sure. I don't agree necessarily, but definitely a perspective I've never considered before.
It is what it is.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's anything to agree or disagree with.
Not even agree or
but
disagree with what you're saying, because everything you said was factually accurate, right? Like everything you said, but there is a huge biological advantage. Just like I think what you kind of deem necessary from like, part of me is like thinking like, oh gosh, well, okay, well, what if there was like a trans girl in the female sports? Would she really get the scholarship? Would that really happen? Maybe, right?
Possibly.
Or maybe she would inspire the girls on her team if she really was the fastest to be even faster. Wishful thinking. And again,
but like Will Thomas, I mean, he was I think 400th when it came to collegiate swimmers. And then when he was swimming for UPenn, and then he's in college and he says, I'm a gal, and he starts swimming against women, even after estrogen, all of a sudden he's number one. And we see that with cycling. We see that with skateboarding. We see that with even the UFC, these guys who are really okay athletes, then they transition. They've already gone through male puberty. They're they're huge, and then they're competing against women, of course they dominate. I'm not saying in every case, but in every case where that does happen, there's a woman who doesn't get that opportunity.
Well, want to know why I'm really happy we're bringing this up, though, is that I think, and I'm not saying it's the wrong focus because you're doing a great job promoting this argument. But I think, first of all, I think you've brought up such great points. And those are all points that I'm going to consider. And it's also not my biggest concern, because I feel like that's the issue, is that so many people, and I'll even say it like in my community, are like, we need to be in the sport of our choice. And here's the one that I have been canceled for like time and time again. It's like, if you don't think trans women are attractive, you're transphobic. It's like, oh my God, stop, right? That shouldn't be the focus, in my opinion. Like, kind of infiltrating is the wrong word because that makes us sound like the bad guys. But access to female sports shouldn't be the priority. And neither is everyone thinking we're attractive if we identify with something. What the priority should be is simply being visible and being allowed to exist, in my opinion. That is all I want, right? Like, you don't need to put me on any sports team. You don't need to say that I'm cute. Like, you don't need to, if I'm like, oh, I'm non-binary. It's like, oh, well, I'm straight. It's like, but I'm non-binary. No, don't like me. I don't need everyone to like me. I don't need to play on every sports team. I don't need to be first place. And I hope that a majority of the trans and non-binary community would agree with me. But it's more about actual discrimination. You're not allowed to be around this, like, you're not allowed to be around kids. You're not allowed to be around this group. You're not allowed access to this institution. That's my issue.
Well, it becomes complicated when, you know, the phrases like trans women are women, trans men are men. Well, if that's really true, then why shouldn't they just go everywhere that women are? But it's like, at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but I don't want the 6-foot dude in the locker room, even if he's not like doing the thing that like Planet Fitness and stuff. I don't want him in the locker room with me. I don't want him in the locker room with my daughters. I want my girls to be able to play sports, and I don't want them to have to worry about getting an elbow to the chest by a 6'2" guy when they're a sophomore in high school. And I think girls have the right to compete against girls. Girls have the right to single sex spaces, and men or boys identifying as the opposite sex completely threatens that.
Slightly disagree, but I understand.
And like, I mean, if we look at women's prisons, rape shelters, where these most vulnerable women are forced to share these spaces with men who identify as women have the same criminality pattern, as men who identify as men. And so you're putting women in these very vulnerable positions. A lot of times, these men who identify as women are still attracted to women. And I mean, poor girls.
Is that true? So, I actually don't even know if that's true. I have to look into that. Like, if that, like, trans women are on average... Are trans women on average lesbians? I need to check into that.
Oh, I don't know about on average.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say lesbians. I would say.
Oh, sorry. How I would frame it respectfully is like, are trans women lesbians? How you would frame it is like, are men that are.
I have no idea if it's average, but it's definitely there. Rachel Levine, the HHS assistant secretary or something. I mean, I think he identifies as like a lesbian or whatever. And so like, yeah, that's super awkward. I mean, not even just awkward. It's traumatizing for women like Riley Gaines, who had to compete against Will Thomas, says that without any warning, he just like full frontal changed in the locker room with all the girls, and they had no recourse. And this is not like a one-off. And so I know you might say it's a minority. Maybe it is. I pray to God that it is. The fact that it's happening, this is why I don't use preferred pronouns.
Right.
This is why I don't assent to any part of it. Well, it's an entire ideology that is harming girls and women and children. And that's why. And you see it as a, point of personal respect. I see it as like assenting to destruction.
Okay. One last question.
Last thing. I think this is a great way to end it.
Hear me out. Like I say, I'm hired by like a lot of schools, right? So in your opinion, like, where should I, like, because the bathroom debate, right? I get this all the time. Like, what bathroom do you use? And right? And for me, which you can appreciate because I know you as a person slightly at this point, and I know that you are for the betterment of children and making sure they're safe, right? That's my number one concern as well. However, I walk into a school site and I go, oh, I'm about to go teach. And I go, like, oh, where's the bathroom, right? And I usually have my blazer on. I have the full face of makeup on. And they go, oh, that's right there. It's the girls' bathroom. And an 8-year-old girl like walks out of it. I'm like,
yeah, totally inappropriate.
In my situation, for me and how I identify in that situation, I found that to be inappropriate. And I go like, no. And they go like, oh, oh, and they're super apologetic because they think that I'm trans, I'm non-binary, right? But I use the men's bathroom. But then they go, oh, well, okay, boys is right there. 10-year-old boy walks out of the bathroom. Again, no, right? And I'm like, is there an adult bathroom? And they're like, other side of campus. And I'm like, I'll see you in 5 minutes. Yeah. Right? Because think about that. Like,
I know, I
you know
agree.
What I mean? Like, that's rough for me as somebody who's gender queer. The girls' bathroom, I'm definitely looked at as some weird man predator. Boys' bathroom, still looked at as some weird man predator. Like, I need a third option here.
And you should feel, I think adults, and I'm sorry, again, a difference between like men and women, adult men and women, because traditionally sexual predators tend to be male. There is kind of like a fear just because they're bigger, stronger, and all that too. Like, I think there is a fear. There'd be more of a like, whoa, you just went into the kid's bathroom for a male than it would be if like a woman went in there. But I do think absolutely, just to keep it safe, have a distinction between the teacher bathroom and the kids bathroom.
Again, I feel a gender neutral bathroom,
that way.
Or in my opinion, family bathroom would solve
and
a majority
by the way,
of this.
when you're like a kid in school and you've got like, I don't know, Mrs. Smith peeing next to you, it's
you
weird.
You just don't want that.
It's weird anyway.
No valid educator, queer, straight, wants to be in a bathroom with a child.
And you shouldn't.
And you shouldn't. Yeah. You should not want that. I think family bathrooms for the win. Please make this happen.
Well, this is a great way to end it. We agree on family bathrooms. There we go.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for coming, you guys.
An absolute pleasure. You are wonderful.
This was great.
And you presented the whole thing up?
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Shake your hands too. All right. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Yes.